Clara Bennett ripped the letter open with both hands and read 3 sentences that ended the only future she had ever allowed herself to want. He had chosen someone else. She was still wearing the dress she'd traveled 3 days in. Still standing on the platform of a town she'd never seen before. Still holding the hope she had carried across 1,000 miles of open country, like something fragile and irreplaceable, and now it was gone, and the man who had taken it hadn't even had the decency to say it to her face. He had written a letter, 3 paragraphs, signed it yours sincerely. If this story is already hitting somewhere deep, please subscribe to this channel right now and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Now let's go back to where it all began. The letter was not long. That was the first thing Clara noticed, not the cruelty of the words, but how few of them Arthur Haley had needed to destroy her. 3 short paragraphs. A handful of sentences arranged with the brisk efficiency of a man who had already moved on to his next appointment before he finished writing them. A signature at the bottom that looked almost cheerful. She read it once, then again, then a third time, standing on the platform of the Willow Creek station with her 3 heavy trunks beside her, and the last passenger car already emptying behind her. Because some part of her brain refused to accept what her eyes were clearly reporting. Dear Clara, by the time you read this, I will have made arrangements of a different nature. Miss Eugenia Hartfield and I have come to an understanding that better serves both our families and our futures. I wish you no ill will and hope you find your circumstances improved. The engagement is dissolved. Please do not come to the house. Yours sincerely, Arthur J. Haley. Yours sincerely. Clara lowered the letter. Around her, Willow Creek moved through its ordinary Wednesday wagon wheels, freight handlers shouting across the yard, 2 women crossing the street with their market baskets, laughing at something private between them. The platform was emptying fast. In another 3 minutes she would be the only person left on it. She had $11.40 in her purse. That was everything. No ticket home, no family to wire for help. No plan that had not been built around a man who had apparently made his decision last Tuesday while she was still on a train somewhere in Nebraska, counting the miles and letting herself imagine. She pressed her lips together hard and fixed her eyes on a point at the far end of the street and breathed. Head up, shoulders back, give them nothing. Her mother's voice. Clara had been hearing it in difficult moments for the 3 years since her mother died, and she called on it now like a hand reaching through darkness. She was 25 years old. She had survived worse humiliations than this, though at the moment she could not quite think of one specific enough to be convincing. She had not eaten since morning. Her good traveling dress was wrinkled beyond saving. Her feet hurt in ways she didn't have the energy to itemize. And she was standing in a town she had never set foot in before today, holding a letter from a man she had spent 8 months writing careful. Honest letters to a man who had written back and called her charming and sensible, and said would she consider matrimony. And she had considered it. She had considered it with everything she had. She had sewn a dress and packed 3 trunks and crossed the country. Stop. She folded the letter, put it in her bag, clasped the bag shut. That was done. What came next was the only thing that mattered now. Ma'am? She turned. A woman was coming out of the dress shop across the street, tall, narrow-faced, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who had somewhere important to be, and wanted witnesses to confirm it. She stopped on the boardwalk and looked at Clara with the particular expression of a person collecting information she intended to share. You came in on the noon train, the woman called. Yes, Clara said. Thought so. The woman's eyes moved over the 3 trunks, the travel dress, the bag clasped shut in both hands. Arthur Haley's girl? The words went through her like cold water. Clara stood very straight. I beg your pardon? We heard he was expecting someone. The woman said it pleasantly, which made it worse. Shame about Eugenia Hartfield. She's a lovely girl. Very well situated. She paused to let that settle. You have People here in Willow Creek? I'm managing, Clara said. The woman smiled with her mouth only. Of course you are, dear. She moved on down the boardwalk, and Clara heard her say something to the two women she passed, and the three of them glanced back, and Clara turned away and looked at the street and breathed through her nose, slow and even, and gave them nothing. Nothing, that's a lot of luggage for a woman standing alone. The voice came from her left, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who chose his words the way other men chose their tools, carefully, without waste. Clara turned. He was at the edge of the platform, one shoulder against the post, arms loose at his sides. Somewhere past 40, dark hair going silver at the temples. A jaw that hadn't seen a razor in several days, work coat, dusty boots, a hat that had survived considerable weather. He was watching her with an expression that was not pity and not the slow, assessing look she had learned to recognize and brace against. He was simply looking at her, like she was a person. Like he was waiting to find out what kind. I'm managing, Clara said for the second time in 3 minutes. I heard you tell Mrs. Alderman that already. He pushed off the post and walked toward her at an easy, unhurried pace, looking at the trunks and then back at her face. Nathaniel Cross, I run the Cross Ranch about 4 miles north of town. In Cincinnati, you did not give your name to a strange man on a platform. There were rules. Clara had followed those rules her entire life, and they had delivered her here, to this platform, with $11.40 and a letter signed yours sincerely. Clara Bennett, she said, Miss Bennett. He looked at her steadily. You have anywhere to go? Simple words, no softness in them, no performance of sympathy. Just the question itself, asked plainly by a man who already had a fair idea of the answer and had decided to ask it anyway. I'm working on that, she said. He glanced down the street. Arthur Haley lives 2 blocks that direction. Big white house, green shutters. He's been engaged to Eugenia Hartfield since last Tuesday. He said it without inflection, looking back at her. I'm not saying that to wound you. I'm saying it because I'd rather you hear it plain than piece it together from other people's pleasure in telling you. Clara held his gaze. Thank you, she said, for being plain. You're welcome. He looked at the trunks. I'll ask you once more, Miss Bennett, and then I won't trouble you again with it. You have anywhere to go? Clara thought about $11.40. She thought about the rented room that no longer existed, the father who had made clear she wasn't wanted, the 8 months of letters she had believed in with everything she had. She thought about the trunk with the ivory dress in it, the pearl buttons from her mother's gown, the careful stitching done by lamplight through long winter evenings. No, she said, I don't. Nathaniel Cross nodded once. Reached down, picked up the largest of her 3 trunks with the straightforward efficiency of a man accustomed to heavy things, and turned toward the street. Now you do, he said. Come on. Clara stood completely still for 3 seconds. Then she picked up her small bag and followed him, because she had no other reasonable choice, and because something in those 3 words, plain and unadorned, and carrying no promise beyond the immediate moment, had reached into the cold, frightened center of her chest and pressed against something she hadn't known was still alive. He did not look back to check if she was following. She found oddly that this made her trust him more than anything else he could have done. The wagon was hitched outside the feed store working vehicle. No pretensions, 2 solid horses, standing patient and indifferent. Nathaniel loaded the large trunk into the back without ceremony. Then came back for the other 2. I can carry one, Clara said. He paused, looked at her. All right, he said, and handed her the smaller without argument. She lifted it over the side of the wagon. It required more effort than she wanted to show, and she managed without asking for help, and he said nothing about it one way or the other. That mattered to her more than she could have explained. Mrs. Alderman was watching from across the street. The 2 women from earlier had found a third. The man outside the general store had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. Willow Creek had arranged itself into an audience. and Clara could feel the weight of every eye on her back as she climbed up to the wagon bench and arranged her skirts and set her face toward the road ahead. Head up, shoulders back. Give them nothing. Nathaniel climbed up on the other side and gathered the reins. Mrs. Alderman runs the boarding house, he said. Conversational, eyes forward. She'd want $3 a week in references, and she'd have questions. Lots of them. I see my housekeeper left last spring. Ranch cook 2 months after. He clicked his tongue and the horses moved off. I've got 12 ranch hands who've been eating whatever they can manage on their own. Mostly beans and whatever hope they haven't used up yet. A pause. I'm not offering charity, Miss Bennett. I'm offering a working situation. Room, board, and fair wages for cooking and keeping house. It's hard work, long hours. Most women with any options wouldn't consider it. Clara looked at the side of his face. What makes you think I can cook? I don't know yet if you can cook. He kept his eyes on the road. I know you're practical enough to answer a direct question honestly, and too proud to take pity when it's offered. That tells me something about the kind of person you are. He glanced at her. Can you cook? Yes, good enough. They rode without speaking for a while. The town disappeared behind them, the street noise fading, replaced by open land and the sound of hooves and wind. The sky was enormous, the kind of enormous she had not been prepared for, the scale of it, the way it went on past every horizon without apology. Mr. Cross, she said, yeah. Why are you doing this? He was quiet long enough that she thought he had decided not to answer. Then he said, without looking at her, stood in a place like that once myself. Different circumstances. But I know what it looks like when a person's somewhere they didn't plan to be with no clear way forward. Another pause. Didn't sit right with me to walk past it. Clara studied his profile. Unreadable. A man who had learned at some point and at some cost to keep his face very still. I'm not helpless, she said. I can see that. And I'm not looking for someone to feel sorry for me. Good, he said, because I don't. He shifted the reins to one hand. I need someone who can keep 12 grown men from doing themselves harm with their own cooking. You need a place. Seems like it balances out. Clara faced forward. The horses plodded steadily north. Somewhere behind her, Arthur Haley was in his White House with the green shutters, working out the arrangements of his new life, a life she had been a placeholder in, nothing more. A practical option until a better one appeared. She made a decision, quiet and internal, the way the most important decisions usually are. She was done being the woman abandoned on that platform. She was going to be the woman on this wagon bench, heading north, beginning something she couldn't see the end of yet. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't warm. It was simply true, and she held it like something solid against the current, and it was enough. The Cross Ranch came into view after 40 minutes, a collection of working buildings set against a long ridge. A barn, outbuildings, a main house that was large and plainly kept, nothing ornamental. Everything spoke of purpose and hard use. Nothing spoke of the life she had spent years imagining for herself. Good. That life had not turned out to be real. Better to start with something that was. A man came out of the barn as they pulled up, weathered, bow-legged, somewhere past 60, white mustache, eyes that took in the world and sorted it fast. Harlan, Nathaniel said, stepping down. This is Miss Clara Bennett. She'll be cooking and keeping house. Harlan looked at her with the frank assessment of a man who had earned the right to form opinions quickly. Can she make biscuits? Yes, Clara said before Nathaniel could answer for her. And I make a beef stew that will make you forget the last 3 years of your life. Harlan's mustache moved. He turned to Nathaniel. I like her, he said flatly, and went back in the barn. That small, almost smile crossed Nathaniel's face again, the briefest shift at the corner of his mouth, and Clara filed it away as the most promising thing she had seen all day. He showed her the house, large enough, neglected in the particular way of a space nobody had cared about in a long time. Furniture pushed wherever, dust gathering along the baseboards. A kitchen used with urgency but no affection. Clara moved through it quietly, making notes she didn't share. The room was small and clean. A bed, a washstand, a window looking out at the ridge. A door with a latch that worked. "This acceptable?" Nathaniel asked. 4 walls, a window, a door that locked from the inside. More than she had walked in with this morning. "Yes," she said. "It's fine." He nodded. "Supper's at 6. Harlan knows where everything is." He turned to leave, then stopped. "Miss Bennett." "Yes?" He looked at her directly. "Nobody here knows your business from before today." "Nobody needs to. You're the housekeeper and cook at the Cross Ranch. That's all there is to say about it." Something released in her chest that had been clenched tight since she opened that letter on the platform. A knot she hadn't fully known was there until it loosened. "Thank you, Mr. Cross," she said. He left her to it. She stood in the middle of that small room for a moment, listening to his boots on the stairs, the front door, the steps outside. Then she opened the nearest trunk, not the one with the dress in it. She left that one closed and began unpacking what she needed. By 5 o'clock, she had the kitchen organized the way she wanted it. By 5:30, the stew was going and the biscuits were in. By 5:45, the smell had reached the barn, because she heard Harlan say something she couldn't make out, and a younger voice respond with what sounded like genuine religious feeling. The ranch hands filed in at 6:12 of them, trail-worn and quiet, moving with the automatic caution of men who had learned not to expect much from a dinner table. When they saw the food, actual food, a real spread, real effort on every plate, the room went absolutely still. A young red-headed man at the end of the bench, Billy, she would learn, 20 years old and surviving primarily on salt pork and optimism, stared at the stew like a man seeing something he had begun to doubt was real. "Lord Almighty," he said, "is that actual stew?" "Sit down and find out," Clara said. They sat. They ate. The room filled up with the sounds of men who were profoundly, genuinely grateful, and Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and listened to it, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten it had a name. Useful. Capable. Exactly right for exactly this moment. Nathaniel came in after the others had settled, filled his plate without ceremony, and took his place at the head of the table. He ate without fanfare, and listened to the men around him with the quiet, complete attention of someone who led by presence rather than noise. He asked a question here and there about the work of the day. He didn't raise his voice once. Clara watched him briefly from the kitchen doorway. Then she went back to her work. After supper, Harlan stayed to dry dishes. She hadn't asked him to. He simply appeared with a towel and started working, and she accepted this without comment. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Harlan said, "He's not a bad man." Clara kept washing. "I didn't say he was. He don't hand out words easy." But he ate 3 servings of that stew. Harlan set a dried plate on the stack. "That's the most I've seen him eat at one sitting since Mrs. Dabrowski left. 3 servings is about as close to a standing ovation as you're going to get from Nathaniel Cross." Clara felt something warm move through her, not happiness yet, but the first real suggestion that happiness was not out of reach. "Good to know," she said. "Whatever happened in town before he brought you out here," Harlan said, hanging up his towel, "you look like a woman who's going to be just fine." He said it the same way he said everything, flat and certain, like stating the weather. Then he was gone. Clara stood alone in the clean kitchen. Outside, the Montana night had come down enormous and fully dark, full of stars in a way that town skies never managed, the silence so deep she could hear the horses shifting in the barn. She dried her hands. She looked around the kitchens she had already begun to claim as her own. She thought about the platform, the letter, "Yours sincerely." $11.40 and nowhere to go. She thought about 3 words said plainly by a man who didn't look back at. She thought about 12 men going quiet at the sight of a real meal, and Harlan with his dish towel, and a room with a latch on the door, and a small almost smile she had filed away as the most promising thing she'd seen all day. She turned off the lamp and went upstairs. She latched the door from the inside. She did not cry. She had decided, somewhere on a wagon bench heading north, that she was finished crying over things that had never deserved her tears. What she could not have known, lying in the dark of that small room with the ridge outside her window and the Montana stars burning cold and far above, was that Nathaniel Cross was still awake at the other end of the house. Sitting at his desk in the dark the way he sometimes did when the silence in the house felt too large to sleep through. His hands around a cup of coffee gone cold, thinking about a woman who had said "I'm managing" twice in 5 minutes to people who already knew she wasn't, and had meant it both times, the first time as a defense and the second time as something else. Something closer to a promise she was making to herself. He had met people in his life who folded under the weight of a single bad day. He had met plenty of them, men who had everything and crumbled when one thing went wrong. He had also met, fewer times, people who took whatever they'd been handed, no matter how unfair or how heavy, and found a way to carry it forward with their chin up and their eyes open. He didn't have a word for what he had seen on that platform today. He wasn't much for words in general, but he knew what he'd seen. And for the first time in a long time, Nathaniel Cross sat in the dark of his own house and felt something other than alone. He didn't examine it. He wasn't ready for that. He poured the cold coffee out, rinsed the cup, and went to bed. Down the hall, Clara Bennett closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not dream of the life she had lost. She dreamed, instead, of the one she was only just beginning to build with her own hands, on her own terms, in a place she had never planned to be. Sometimes that is exactly where you find the life that was always meant for you. She was up before dawn, not because anyone told her to be. Not because Nathaniel had set any schedule or Harlan had knocked on her door. She was up because the kitchen was a disaster waiting to be solved, and Clara Bennett had never in her life been able to sleep past a problem she could fix with her hands. She lit the stove before the sky turned gray. She took inventory of every shelf, every crate, every barrel flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, a modest supply of canned goods, coffee enough for an army, and almost nothing fresh. She made a mental list of what she would need from town and then set it aside, because town meant Mrs. Alderman's narrow face and the women on the boardwalk, and a conversation she was not ready to have yet. One thing at a time. By the time the first ranch hands stumbled into the kitchen at 5:30, there were scrambled eggs with salt pork, fresh biscuits, a pot of coffee so strong it could have started the fire itself, and a woman standing at the stove who looked like she had been there for years. Billy, the red-headed one, stopped dead in the kitchen doorway. He stared, he blinked. He looked behind him at the man coming in after him, a broad, quiet fellow named Dutch, who spoke in whole sentences maybe twice a week and said, "She did it again." "I can see that," Dutch said. "It's not even light outside yet." "I can see that too." Clara set the biscuit pan on the table without comment. "There's honey in the crock on the left," she said. "Don't fight over it. There's enough." They sat, they ate. And for the second morning in a row, the dining room at the Cross Ranch sounded like a place where people actually wanted to be. Nathaniel came in last, the way he always would. She was already learning. He checked the barn and the yard before he came to the table, every single morning, because he checked everything before he trusted it. He poured his own coffee, took his seat, and looked at the spread on the table with an expression that gave away nothing. "Biscuits again," he said. "You have the supplies for biscuits," Clara said. "When you have the supplies for something else, I'll make something else." He looked up at her. Something shifted briefly in his expression, not quite amusement, but the territory adjacent to it. "I'll send someone into town for a supply order," he said. "I already made the list," Clara said, and set it beside his coffee cup. He picked it up, read through it, set it back down. "This is thorough," he said. "I'm a thorough person, Mr. Cross." He said nothing to that, but he folded the list and put it in his breast pocket, and when Harlan came in 10 minutes later, Nathaniel handed it to him and said, "Get what's on this." All of it. Harlan looked at the list, looked at Clara and tucked it away without a word. Small victories, she was learning, had a particular sound at the Cross Ranch. They sounded like silence that meant yes. The first week moved fast and hard. There was so much to do that Clara barely had time to be afraid of the doing. She cooked 3 meals a day for 14 people, 12 hands, Harlan, and Nathaniel kept the main house clean, managed the supply inventory, and somewhere in between, began learning the rhythms of a working ranch the way you learn a new language, by throwing yourself in and refusing to drown. The men were a study in contrasts. Billy talked constantly and meant nothing by any of it, which was actually restful in its own way. Dutch said almost nothing, but when he did speak, it was worth hearing. There was a Mexican vaquero named Ernesto who sang while he worked and taught Clara the words to 3 songs she would never fully understand, but found herself humming for weeks. There was a younger man everyone called Rabbit, who was approximately 17 years old and ate more than any 2 of the others combined, and who had taken to appearing in the kitchen doorway between meals with the hopeful expression of a dog who has identified the most likely source of kindness in the household. "Miss Clara," Rabbit said one afternoon, materializing at her elbow while she was rolling pie dough, "is there anything left from lunch?" "There's cornbread in the cloth on the second shelf," she said, without looking up. "You already knew I was going to ask. I've known since noon you were going to ask." He grinned the wide, unguarded grin of a boy who hadn't yet learned to be careful with his smiles and went for the cornbread. And Clara kept rolling her dough and thought, not for the first time, that she liked these men. She had not expected to. She had arrived at this ranch braced for suspicion or condescension, because that was what she had learned to expect from people who looked at her and saw a woman of her size and her circumstance and decided they already knew everything they needed to know. But these men were tired and hungry and practical, and what they wanted from her was simple and concrete and within her power to give. And there was an honesty in that transaction that Clara found more comfortable than she had expected. Nathaniel was the variable. He ran the ranch with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been doing it long enough that he didn't need to think very hard about most of it, and he moved through the days with a settled, purposeful energy that Clara found herself watching more than she meant to. Not because she was forming any particular feelings about it, she was far too sensible for that, and far too recently arrived from a disaster caused entirely by feelings she had formed too quickly about a man who turned out to be nothing like what she believed. She watched Nathaniel cross the way you watch weather at the edge of the horizon, not because you expect anything specific from it, but because it tells you things about the day ahead. What it told her, in that first week, was this: he was fair, he was consistent, and he was carrying something heavy that he had no intention of putting down. She didn't ask about it. It wasn't her place, and she had enough of her own. 8 days after she arrived, she went into town. She had to. The supply run Harlan had done covered most of what she needed, but there were things she could only select herself: cloth for mending, certain spices, thread in the right colors. She had a purpose for going, which meant she could not let the prospect of encountering Mrs. Alderman and her particular circle of informants keep her home. She went on a Thursday morning, in the buckboard wagon Nathaniel told her to take whenever she needed it, and she drove herself, because she was perfectly capable of driving a buckboard wagon, and she did not need an escort for a trip into town any more than she needed someone to tie her own boots. Willow Creek on a Thursday was busy in the modest, purposeful way of a small working town. She had been there less than 2 weeks, and she had only arrived the once, and yet she felt the moment she was recognized, felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The subtle shift in the quality of the silence as she drove past. She tied up the wagon outside the dry goods store and went in. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles named Mr. Fenwick, helped her promptly and professionally, and did not ask her any questions she hadn't come to answer, which she appreciated. She was halfway through her list when the bell above the door chimed and 2 women came in. She knew one of them from the platform, the narrow-faced one. Mrs. Alderman. She now knew the same woman who had asked, "Are you Arthur Haley's girl?" in the tone of someone reading a sentence from a book they'd already decided was beneath them. Mrs. Alderman saw her immediately. There was a pause, brief, deliberate, the kind of pause that is itself a statement, and then Mrs. Alderman said in a carrying voice clearly not intended to be private, "That's her." The one Nathaniel Cross took in off the platform, the abandoned bride. The woman beside her made a small sound. "Oh, that's the one?" "All the way from Cincinnati," Mrs. Alderman said. Imagine the humiliation, traveling all that way only to be told. "I can hear you," Clara said pleasantly, without turning around. The silence that followed had a different quality. Clara finished her item with Mr. Fenwick, picked up her wrapped package, and turned around. Both women were looking at her with the particular expression of people who had not expected a response and were recalculating rapidly. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Alderman said. "Not sorry at all." "We didn't mean to. You meant to exactly what you did," Clara said. "Which is your right, Mrs. Alderman. This is a free country." She picked up her basket. "But I'd suggest that, if you're going to discuss a person's private business in a public room, you might want to make sure they aren't standing 6 feet away from you. Good morning." She walked out of the store with her spine straight and her chin level, and the door swung shut behind her, and she stood on the boardwalk in the morning sun and allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of relief before she moved on to her next errand. Because she had come to town to accomplish a list of things, and she was going to accomplish the list. What she didn't see, because she was already moving, was Mrs. Alderman watching her through the store window with an expression that had changed from amusement to something considerably less comfortable. She was almost back to the wagon when a woman stepped out of the milliner's shop and fell into stride beside her. "Miss Bennet," the woman said. Clara looked at her. She was somewhere around 50, with an open, capable face and the straight back of someone accustomed to getting things done. "I'm Margaret Howell," the woman said. "I run the school on Birch Street." "I saw what happened just now in Fenwick's. I'm fine," Clara said. "I know you are," Margaret said. "I wanted you to know not everyone in this town is Helen Alderman. Some of us are just people." She extended her hand. "It's good to meet you, Miss Bennet. Nathaniel Cross is a decent man. His ranch has needed someone like you for a long time." Clara looked at her hand. Then she shook it. "Thank you, Mrs. Howell." "Margaret." The woman smiled, genuine, uncomplicated. "Come by the school sometime if you're in town. I always have coffee on." She went back into the milliner's, and Clara stood on the boardwalk with her basket and her list and the strange, small warmth of having been seen, not pitied, not catalogued, not assessed, just seen, by a stranger who had nothing to gain from the kindness except the doing of it. She drove back to the ranch. She had been holding herself very carefully for 8 days. She had been practical and efficient, and she had kept moving, because movement had kept her from having to feel the full weight of what had happened on that platform. And she had managed. She had managed well. But something about Margaret Howell's handshake opened a crack in all that management, and she cried for about 4 minutes somewhere on the road between Willow Creek and the Cross Ranch, where nobody could see her and it didn't cost her anything. And then she dried her face and pulled herself together and drove the rest of the way home. Home. She had thought that word at the ranch, and she noticed it, and she filed it away without examining it too closely. Nathaniel was at the fence line when she pulled the buckboard through the gate. He saw her face. She was certain she had cleared it completely, but he saw it anyway, with those watching, weather-reading eyes, and he said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. He simply fell into step beside the wagon as she drove it toward the barn. "How was town?" he asked. "Productive," she said. He looked at the road ahead. "Helen Alderman say something to you?" Clara glanced at him. "How did you know?" "Helen Alderman says something to everybody. It's her primary occupation." He was quiet for a moment. "She's got a long tongue and a short memory for her own history." I wouldn't put too much stock in anything she says." "I don't," Clara said. "But thank you." She pulled the wagon to a stop. Nathaniel took the horse's head while she climbed down, and then handed the lead rope to Rabbit, who had appeared from the barn with his usual impeccable timing. "Miss Clara," Rabbit said, eyeing the packages in the back, "did you get?" "The licorice is under the cornmeal sack," she said. "One piece before supper, I mean it." His face lit up like a struck match. He gathered the packages with considerably more enthusiasm than the task strictly required and disappeared into the barn, and Clara heard him say something to Billy that made Billy laugh. And the sound of it cut through the afternoon air bright and clean. Nathaniel was watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. He picked up two of the heavier packages and carried them toward the house without being asked, and she followed with the rest, and that was the end of that conversation. But something was different between them after that day. Not dramatically different. Nathaniel Cross did not do dramatic. But there was a small, incremental shift in the way he moved around her. He started leaving her copy of the weekly supply budget on the kitchen table instead of keeping it in his office, which meant he trusted her to work with it. He started asking, in passing, whether there was anything the kitchen needed, rather than waiting for her to come to him. Small things, the kind of things that mean a great deal when a person knows how to read them. Clara was learning to read him. 3 weeks in, one of the horses went wrong in the leg, a good quarter horse named Red that Nathaniel had owned for 7 years. She knew he valued the animal the way working men value reliable things, practically, without sentiment, but genuinely. She heard him in the barn at 11 at night, talking to the horse in a low voice while he treated the leg, and she put together a plate of cold supper and took it out without announcement and left it on the fence post beside the barn door. She was back in the house before he found it. At breakfast the next morning he said, "Thank you for the plate last night. You hadn't eaten supper," she said. "I know, I figured you'd be out there a while." "I was." He looked at his coffee. "Red's going to be fine." "Good," she said. "He's a good horse." He looked up at her. "You don't know much about horses." "I know he's important to you," she said, "which makes him a good horse as far as I'm concerned." The almost smile appeared, and this time it lasted a full second before he recovered from it, which was a personal record as far as Clara could tell. She was starting to catalog them, the almost smiles. The ways his attention sharpened when something interested him. The way he asked short questions that were really long questions in disguise. She told herself she was simply learning the household, learning the rhythms of the man who ran it, because that was her job, and she was thorough. She was thorough enough to know she wasn't being entirely honest with herself. But she was also thorough enough to know that she had arrived at this ranch 6 weeks ago with $11.40 and nowhere to go, and that building a life, a real one, a solid one that belonged to her, required more than feelings. It required time and work, and the kind of patience that wasn't waiting but building. There was a difference she was learning. Waiting was passive. Building was not. She was building. 4 weeks in, the letter arrived. She recognized the handwriting before she recognized what the recognition meant, the slightly backward slant, the unnecessary flourish on the capital letters, the self-conscious elegance of a man who wanted his correspondence to look impressive. She stood in the front hallway, with the letter in her hand for a long moment before she opened it. "Dear Clara, I have been thinking of you since your arrival in Willow Creek and wondering if you found yourself comfortable. Eugenia and I have encountered some difficulties of a financial nature, and I find myself in a position where I might need to reconsider certain arrangements. I wonder if we might speak. I believe we parted under hasty circumstances, and that, given time and reflection, we might find our original understanding was perhaps not so easily dissolved as I suggested in my letter. I know you are staying at the Cross Ranch. I know it cannot be easy. If you would like to discuss your situation, I am at the house on Elm Street until Thursday. Yours sincerely, Arthur J. Haley." Clara read it twice. Then she read it a third time, not because she didn't understand it, but because she wanted to make absolutely sure she was understanding it correctly. He was struggling financially. Eugenia Hartfield had either not been as well situated as advertised, or something had gone wrong in the interim, and Arthur Haley, who had written her 3 paragraphs and signed them yours sincerely, and expected that to be sufficient, was now suggesting that perhaps their engagement had not been so easily dissolved after all. He wanted her back, not because he had realized anything. Not because he had looked at what he'd discarded and understood its worth. But because the alternative had not worked out the way he planned, and Clara was still available, and the Cross Ranch was prosperous, and she was presumably still desperate enough to take what she could get. That was what he believed, that she was still desperate enough. She stood in the hallway for a long moment. She could hear the ranch moving around her rabbit, and Billy arguing good-naturedly about something near the barn, Ernesto's voice carrying from the far pasture, the steady regular sound of Nathaniel somewhere overhead in the office, his boots crossing the floor as he moved between his desk and the window the way he did when he was thinking through a problem. She thought about the woman who had stood on that platform 6 weeks ago. The one with $11.40 and nowhere to go. The one who would have read this letter very differently. Who would have felt, against every rational instinct, the terrible gravitational pull of it, someone choosing her, even badly, even for wrong reasons, even after everything. She thought about that woman. Then she thought about the woman standing in this hallway right now, who had organized a kitchen and fed 14 people 3 times a day and driven herself into town and told Mrs. Alderman to her face that she had been heard, and taken a cold plate out to a man in a barn at 11 at night, and learned the names of 12 horses, and cried for 4 minutes on an empty road, and then dried her face and driven the rest of the way home. She went to the kitchen, found paper and a pen, and wrote 4 sentences. Mr. Haley, I received your letter. I understand your situation. I am not in a position to help you with it. She signed it Clara Bennett, not yours sincerely. Not with regards, nothing that gave him anything he hadn't earned, and sealed it, and put it on the hall table for Harlan to post in the morning. Then she went back to the kitchen and started supper. She was halfway through the vegetable prep when Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there with the loose, considering posture of a man who had noted something and was deciding whether to speak about it. Letter came today, he said. Yes, she said. She didn't stop chopping. From town. Yes, pause, you all right? Clara set down the knife. She turned around and looked at him directly. The way she'd learned, he preferred no softening, no performance, just the plain truth delivered straight. I had a letter from Arthur Haley, she said. He's having financial difficulties, and apparently thinks I might be persuaded to reconsider our arrangement. She picked the knife back up. I wrote back and told him no. I put the letter on the hall table. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. His expression was doing that thing it sometimes did, that careful, deliberate stillness that she had learned, was not blankness but the opposite, that it was the face of a man concentrating very hard on something. That must have been a difficult letter to receive, he said. It wasn't, Clara said. That's the part that surprised me. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, You want me to have someone drive it into town tonight? I can have it posted tonight, instead of tomorrow. Clara looked up. Yes, she said, actually. Yes, I would. He nodded and left, and she heard him call to Rabbit in the yard, and 15 minutes later she heard hoofbeats heading south toward town. And something in her chest settled into place with the quiet finality of a door swinging shut on a room she would never need to go back into. She didn't know that Nathaniel Cross, standing in the yard watching Rabbit ride out, was thinking about a letter he had received once. A different letter, years ago in a different season of his life. He had never told anyone the full story of it. He did not intend to start now. But he was thinking about it, standing in the yard in the evening light, watching the dust settle behind Rabbit's horse. He was thinking about it. And he was thinking about a woman in his kitchen who had said that's the part that surprised me, not as a boast, not as a performance, but as a plain, slightly wondering observation. Like someone discovering an unexpected strength in themselves and being genuinely curious about it. He had known people who were broken by less than what she had walked through. He had watched men with twice her resources fall apart over half the trouble. Clara Bennett had arrived with nothing, and in 6 weeks she had built something solid enough to stand on. He went inside and said nothing about any of this, because he was not a man who trafficked in revelations, and because some things were better understood in silence than explained in words. But that night, for the first time in longer than he could honestly recall, the house didn't feel too quiet. It felt almost like it was supposed to sound exactly this way. He wasn't ready to follow that thought to its conclusion. But he let it stay. The storm didn't announce itself. That was the thing about Montana weather that Clara had learned in 2 months at the ranch. It didn't negotiate. It didn't send warnings you could plan around. One morning the sky was clear, and the work was ordinary, and the day felt like every other day. And then by mid-afternoon the temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour, and the clouds came in from the northwest like something with intention. And Nathaniel looked at the horizon at 3 o'clock and said, in the flat, certain voice he used when things were serious, get everything inside. Now the men moved fast, Clara moved faster. She had learned enough about ranch work in 2 months to understand what a storm of this size meant: livestock to secure, equipment to cover, the water supply to check, the barn to reinforce against wind that could pull boards loose like paper. She didn't wait to be assigned. She went to the kitchen, banked the stove against the cold that was coming, put every pot she had to filling with water from the pump while it was still accessible, and started cooking everything in the larder that would go bad if the temperature inside dropped too far. Billy appeared in the kitchen doorway at 3:30, wind-burned and wide-eyed. Mr. Cross says you should stay inside, Miss Clara. Mr. Cross is not wrong, she said without stopping. Go help Dutch with the south fence. It was loose yesterday. He said I heard what he said, Billy. I'm inside. Go, he went. The storm hit at 4. Clara had heard wind before Cincinnati got its share of spring storms, rattling windows and bending trees, but this was a different thing entirely. This was wind that meant it, that pushed us the walls of the house like something trying to get in, that made the timbers groan and the shutters bang in a continuous percussion that felt almost deliberate. She kept cooking. She kept the stove hot. She moved between the kitchen and the main room, checking the windows, managing the fire in the hearth, doing the things that could be done from inside, while outside the men worked in conditions she could hear but not see. Then she heard the shout. It came from the direction of the barn, a voice she recognized as Harlan's, higher than usual, carrying the particular pitch of a man past the age of pretending things are fine when they aren't. She was at the front door before she consciously decided to move. The wind hit her like a wall. She pushed through it, one arm over her face, heading toward Harlan's voice, and found him 10 yards from the barn door, kneeling in the mud beside a figure on the ground. Nathaniel. He was conscious. She could see him moving, could see him trying to get up, but his right arm was wrong, and the way he was holding it told her something had given. The barn door had swung free in a gust and caught him across the shoulder and thrown him sideways into the fence post, and he had gone down hard. I'm fine, he said, which was the most predictable thing he had ever said in her presence. You're not fine, Harlan said. It's my shoulder. I've had worse. You've had worse because you do things like this, Harlan said in the tone of a man who had been having this argument for 20 years. He looked at Clara. Get him inside, I don't need. Nathaniel, Clara said. He stopped. She had not used his given name before. Not once in 2 months. She had called him Mr. Cross with the careful formality of a woman who understood the importance of keeping distances she needed. But she said it now. In the flat, certain voice she had apparently learned from somewhere nearby, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before, surprised, and something else, something she didn't have time to examine. "Come inside," she said. "Please," he came. She got him to the kitchen table, the warmest room, the most light, and she examined the shoulder with careful, efficient hands that did not apologize for what they were doing. She had helped a neighbor set her young son's arm once, back in Cincinnati, and she had read enough practical medicine to know the difference between a break and a dislocation. This was a dislocation. Painful, serious, manageable. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I figured," he said. "I need you to hold on to the table edge and not move." Clara, hold on to the table edge. He held onto the table edge. She set the shoulder with one swift, controlled movement that she had been told and now confirmed was the worst possible second of the process, and then it was done. And Nathaniel let out a breath through his teeth that was as close to an admission of pain as she suspected she was going to get from him. "Done," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Cincinnati," she said. "Neighbor's boy. Hold still." She wrapped the shoulder with strips of cloth she'd torn from a flour sack, working quickly and firmly, and he sat at the table and let her work, which told her more about how much it hurt than anything he'd said or hadn't said. Outside, the storm kept going. Inside, the kitchen was warm and close and full of the sound of wind against the walls, and two people working in the kind of silence that has substance to it. "The men," he said. "Harlan's got them. Dutch is with the livestock. They know what to do. The south fence was Billy and Ernesto went for it at 3:30. I sent them before the worst of it hit." He looked at her. "You sent them. Somebody had to." She tied off the bandage. "You were busy falling down." Another pause. Then something happened that she had not expected. He laughed. Not the almost smile, not the brief shift at the corner of his mouth. An actual laugh, short and genuine, surprised out of him by something he hadn't anticipated. She felt it move through her like a struck chord. "Fair enough," he said. She made him drink coffee and eat something, because he was pale from pain and cold and shock, and he needed the warmth more than he needed his dignity, and to his credit he understood this and complied without further argument. She sat across from him at the kitchen table while the storm raged outside, and for the first time in 2 months they were simply two people in a warm room, without the careful distances they had both been maintaining. "Nathaniel," he said after a while. She looked at him. "You called me Nathaniel. Out there," he looked at his coffee. "Nobody's called me that in a while, just Cross, mostly." "Or Mr. Cross," he paused. "I didn't mind it." Clara looked at her own coffee. "I'll remember that," she said. The storm lasted through the night and into the following morning. The men came in by dark, exhausted and cold and intact, all 12 of them, which Clara confirmed by counting heads at the supper table with a thoroughness that probably looked casual but was not. Nathaniel saw her do it. He didn't say anything, but she saw him see her, and she saw the brief, quiet thing that crossed his face when he did. In the morning, the damage was accessible. 2 fence sections down. Part of the roof on the smaller outbuilding. A supply line to the water trough that needed immediate repair. Nathaniel made his list at the kitchen table with his good arm, drinking Clara's coffee, and she sat across from him with her own list kitchen supplies depleted by the emergency cooking. Repairs needed inside the house, and they worked in parallel, occasionally exchanging information when their lists intersected, like two people who had been doing this together for years, rather than 2 months. It was Harlan who noticed first. He didn't say anything about it directly. Harlan never said anything about anything directly if an indirect route was available, but he looked at the two of them at the kitchen table with their parallel lists, and he looked at Clara. And he looked at his coffee, and he made a sound that wasn't quite a word but communicated something with perfect clarity. Clara chose not to hear it. She was good at that. It was 4 days after the storm, when Nathaniel could move his arm again without the movement in his jaw that meant pain, that he told her about Thomas Reeves. He didn't plan to. She could tell that immediately, the way he started talking with the careful, almost reluctant energy of someone who has decided to say something before they change their mind, before the more cautious part of their brain catches up and intervenes. They were in the main room after supper. The hands had gone to the bunkhouse. Harlan had turned in early. Clara had brought tea she'd found in the back of the pantry, and Nathaniel had accepted a cup without comment, and they were sitting in the particular quiet of a house that felt different than it had 2 months ago, warmer, less empty. Inhabited in a way it apparently hadn't been for some time. "I had a business partner," Nathaniel said, "about 6 years ago." Clara looked at him. "Waited Thomas Reeves. We grew up in the same county. I trusted him the way you trust someone you've known since you were 10 years old, which is to say completely and without examining why." He looked at his tea. "He spent 2 years helping me build this ranch into what it is. I gave him access to everything: accounts, contracts, land records." "Everything. What did he do?" Clara asked. "He filed false claims on 3 parcels of the land we'd developed together. Changed dates on contracts. Made it look like the improvements were his independent work, that I had merely been an employee on my own property." The words came out level, without inflection, in the tone of someone who has said a thing so many times inside their own head that it no longer has the power to surprise them. "He took the eastern parcels in a legal proceeding. I spent everything I had in the courts and I got 2 of the 3 back, but it took 3 years and everything I had saved, and by the time it was done, I had learned something I hadn't known before." "What was that?" Clara said. He looked at her directly. "That the person you trust most is the person who can hurt you the most. And that knowing someone a long time is not the same thing as knowing them." The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere far off, an owl called and was answered. "Is that why you kept everyone at a distance?" Clara said. Not accusing. Simply asking. The way you ask things when you actually want to know. "I kept everyone at a sensible distance," he said. "There's a difference. There's a distance past sensible," she said. "I've seen you on the far side of it." He looked at her. "You've known me 2 months. I've cooked for you 3 times a day for 2 months. I know which problems keep you at your desk at midnight and which ones bring you to the kitchen for coffee at 3 in the morning. And I know the difference between the face you make when something's wrong with the herd and the face you make when something's wrong with a person." She paused. "I'm a thorough person, Nathaniel. You said so yourself." He was quiet for a long moment. "I did say that. Thomas Reeves took something from you that had nothing to do with land," she said. "He took the part of you that believed people were worth trusting. And you've been running this ranch alone ever since, because alone means he can't do it again." The silence stretched out. She waited, because she had learned that Nathaniel Cross needed room around his silences, that they were working silences, not empty ones. "That's accurate," he said at last. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry it happened to you." He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, open in a way he usually wasn't, careful in a way he usually didn't need to be, as if he was examining something that had appeared unexpectedly, and didn't yet know whether to call it safe. "Clara," he said, and then he stopped. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to." He looked at his hands. "When I picked up your trunk on that platform, I told you it was practical. That you needed a place and I needed a cook, and that was true. It was also not the whole truth." She waited. "You were standing there reading that letter, and you were trying so hard not to show what it was doing to you, and you were managing it. You were nearly managing it completely, and I watched you and I thought." He stopped again. Looked at the window. Looked back at her. "I thought that whoever wrote that letter had no idea what they had just walked away from." Clara felt something move through her so suddenly and completely that she had to look away. "Nathaniel," she said. "I'm not saying it to I'm not asking anything from it," he said, with the slightly accelerated pace of a man talking through his own discomfort. "I just thought you should know. That's what I saw. Not a rejected woman, not someone's abandoned plan. A person who was standing in a very hard place and holding themselves together with everything they had." He picked up his tea. "Set it down. I thought you should know someone saw that." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted and settled. "Thank you," Clara said. She said it the way she meant it, which was entirely. "You're welcome," he said, the way he meant it, which was the same. They sat in that room for another hour, not talking about anything in particular, the fence repair schedule, whether Billy was ready to take on more responsibility, the question of a milk cow which the ranch did not have but probably should. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation that builds itself naturally between people who have stopped pretending they are strangers. Clara went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and told herself with great firmness that she was not going to construct anything elaborate from a single honest conversation with a man she had known for 2 months. She was not. She had done that before, with Arthur Haley and his 8 months of careful letters, and she knew precisely where that road ended. She was building a life. She was building it slowly and carefully and with her own hands. She was not going to let her feelings outrun her common sense. She was going to be sensible. She was going to be practical. She was thorough, and she was going to be thorough about this too. She stared at the ceiling for another 20 minutes and then made herself go to sleep. She did not dream of being sensible. The second letter from Arthur Haley arrived 11 days later. Clara was at the kitchen table with the household accounts when Rabbit brought it in from the post, and she recognized the handwriting immediately, and something went tight and cold in her chest, not grief this time, not longing. Something more like anger, which surprised her with its clarity. She opened it. "Dear Clara, I understand you've chosen not to respond in any meaningful way to my previous letter. I want to be direct with you. I am aware that Nathaniel Cross took you in as a domestic worker. I am also aware that his property holdings are considerably more extensive than most people in Willow Creek know, and that recent surveys suggest the northern parcels may have value that has not yet been fully established. I think we both know that your position there is precarious. A housekeeper is not a permanent situation. When Cross decides to marry, and men like him always eventually tend to marry, you will find yourself back where you started. I am willing to reconsider our arrangement. I can offer you security. I can offer you a name and a home. I would ask only that you use your position at the ranch to share with me any information about Cross's land holdings and financial accounts that might be useful. This is a practical offer, Clara. Think carefully." Arthur J. Haley. She read it 3 times. Then she set it on the table and sat very still for a moment, with the particular stillness of a person whose mind is moving very fast in several directions simultaneously. He wasn't asking her to come back. He was asking her to spy. He was asking her to use 2 months of trust that 12 people had placed in her, that Nathaniel Cross had placed in her, access to his household, his kitchen, his accounts, and hand that trust to a man who had written her 3 paragraphs and signed them "yours sincerely" and expected her to be grateful. He thought she was still desperate enough. He thought nothing had changed. She stood up, folded the letter carefully, put it in her apron pocket. Then she walked down the hall and knocked on the door of Nathaniel's office. "Come in." He was at his desk, paperwork spread around him in the organized disorder of someone managing more moving parts than any one person reasonably should. He looked up when she entered, saw her face, set down his pen. "What happened?" he said. "I need you to read something," she said. She took the letter from her apron pocket and held it out. He took it. "Read it." His face didn't change the careful stillness, but she had learned to read what lived underneath that stiffness, and what she saw was not calm. It was the concentrated focus of a man who has just confirmed something he already suspected and is deciding very quickly what to do about it. "Arthur Haley," he said. "Yes. This is the second letter." "Yes. The first asked me to come back. I wrote back and said no." "This one," she paused. "This one is different." "Yes," he said. "It is." He read it again. "Set it on the desk. He knows about the northern parcels." "I don't know how I do." His voice was very even. "Too even. There's only one person outside this ranch who knows about the survey results. I used a land agent named Cooper in Billings. Cooper has a cousin in Willow Creek who drinks." He looked at the letter. That's how information moves in a small territory. Nathaniel, Clara said, I want to be completely clear with you. I have not shared anything about your accounts or your land with anyone. I haven't discussed your business with anyone in town. Clara, he looked at her, I know. The two words landed quietly and completely, without qualification. She exhaled something she had been holding since she walked through his office door. I know, he said again. The fact that you're standing in my office showing me this letter instead of doing what he's asking, that's not something I need to verify. I can see it. He picked up the letter again. The question is what Haley is actually after. The land survey, or something bigger. He mentioned financial accounts, Clara said. I heard that. He was quiet for a moment, thinking with that focused, weather-reading attention she had come to know. Thomas Reeves used a land agent too. Different man. Same county. He set the letter down. Some methods don't change much. Clara felt the cold move through her all over again, not for herself this time. You think this is connected to Thomas Reeves? I think Arthur Haley is not the kind of man who finds his own schemes, Nathaniel said. I think he's the kind of man who attaches himself to other people's schemes and calls himself a partner. He stood up. I need to write some letters today. What can I do? Clara said. He looked at her. The question seemed to surprise him, not that she'd asked it, but the way she'd asked it. Not out of helplessness, not looking for instruction. The way one capable person asks another, what needs doing and where do you need me? Keep this between us for now, he said. The men don't need to be worried. And I need Haley to believe you haven't told me. You want him to think I'm still considering it. I want him to think nothing's changed. He held her gaze. Can you do that? I've been managing my face in difficult situations since I was 12 years old, Nathaniel. That nearly smile. Briefer than usual, because the situation didn't allow for much of it. I know, he said. I'm counting on that. She turned to go. He said, Clara, she stopped. I'm sorry he did this. Coming at you through the mail using your... He paused, searching for the word. Using the hard position you were in when you arrived here. It's a cowardly way to operate. He's a cowardly man, she said. I know that now. I didn't know it well enough before. She held his gaze. I'm not sorry I came to Willow Creek. The room was quiet. Neither am I, Nathaniel said. She went back to the kitchen. She sat at the table with the household accounts and she ran the numbers with careful, precise attention, and she did not let herself feel the full weight of what she had just heard. Not yet, not here, not where anyone could walk in and see it. But she felt the shape of it, the outline of something that had been building since a wagon bench heading north, since cold coffee left on a fence post, since a shoulder set in a kitchen, and a laugh surprised out of a man who didn't laugh easily. Nathaniel Cross had said neither am I, and he had meant it the same way she meant I'm not sorry I came, and they both knew it, and neither of them was ready to say the next thing out loud. But it was there. It had been there for a while, she suspected. She was a thorough person. Thorough people notice things. What she did not know could not have known, sitting at that kitchen table with her careful columns of numbers, was that Arthur Haley had already sent a third letter. Not to her. To a lawyer in Helena with connections to the Territorial Land Board, a man who had done business with Thomas Reeves and who owed Haley a favor he had been waiting years to collect. The scheme that Nathaniel had nearly been destroyed 6 years ago was not finished. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to come back. And that moment, unknown to anyone at the Cross Ranch on that cold October evening, was already in motion. The letter from Helena arrived on a Tuesday. Nathaniel knew what it was before he opened it. Not because he was prescient, but because he had been waiting for something like it since the night Clara showed him Arthur Haley's second letter. Since he'd traced the thread back to Cooper, the land agent, and Cooper's cousin, and the way information moved through small territories like water finding cracks in stone. He had written his own letters, 3 of them, to men he trusted in Billings and Helena, and one in the territorial capital, and he had waited, and now the waiting was over. He read it at his desk with the door closed, which was unusual enough that Harlan noticed and said nothing, which was Harlan's particular way of saying everything. The letter was from a lawyer named Aldis, who represented a land holdings company called Western Territorial Partners. The language was precise and polished and utterly cold. It informed Nathaniel that Western Territorial Partners had acquired, through legal transfer, certain promissory notes originally held by a Mr. Thomas Reeves, notes which according to their records represented an outstanding debt secured against the northern parcels of the Cross Ranch, parcels which had been the subject of recent survey activity suggesting significant undisclosed value. They were requesting full payment within 60 days, or a negotiated transfer of the northern parcels in settlement. Thomas Reeves. 6 years later, and Thomas Reeves was still in the walls of this place, like rot you think you've cut out only to find it's moved deeper into the timber. Nathaniel set the letter on his desk. He sat for a long moment, very still, with the concentrated stillness of a man who is doing serious work behind a quiet face. Then he got up and went to find Harlan. He found him in the barn, which was where Harlan went when he was waiting to be found. "I need you to go to Billings," Nathaniel said, "today. I need you to see a man named Garrett who works out of the courthouse there, and ask him to pull every record on a company called Western Territorial Partners. Formation documents, principals, transfer history. Everything he can find." Harlan looked at him. "How bad is it?" "I don't know yet." He handed over an envelope with money and a sealed note. "Don't talk to anyone about the survey or the northern parcels. Not in town, not on the road. I wasn't born yesterday, Cross." "I know. Go today." Harlan went. Nathaniel stood in the barn for a moment after the wagon pulled out, with the horses moving quietly around him and the particular quality of silence that precedes a storm, not a weather storm this time, but the other kind. The kind he knew how to read because he had lived through it before. He went back to the house. Clara was in the kitchen. She looked at him when he came in and did not ask any of the 7 questions he could see moving behind her eyes, which was one of the things he had come to value most about her. She knew the difference between a moment that needed words and one that needed space. "Harlan's going to Billings," he said. "I saw him go." She poured coffee and set it on the table. "Sit down." He sat. He drank the coffee. She sat across from him with her own cup and waited with the peasant attention. She had the quality of someone who understood that waiting alongside a person was its own form of help. "It's Reeves again," he said. She set down her cup. "Thomas Reeves through a company, Western Territorial Partners. They claim to hold notes against the northern parcels." He looked at his hands. "I dealt with everything Reeves had against me 6 years ago. I have the court records. I have the settlement documents. But if he sold something before the settlement, if he transferred a note to a third party, before I closed it out, and that third party has been sitting on it, waiting for the survey to make the land valuable enough to be worth collecting on," Clara said. He looked at her. "Yes, and Arthur Haley is connected to this company. That's what I'm trying to establish." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "What I don't understand yet is how Haley knew about the survey. Cooper was supposed to be." He stopped, Nathaniel, Clara said. "Mrs. Alderman's husband. What does he do?" He looked at her. "I heard her talking outside the dry goods store 2 weeks ago," Clara said. "She mentioned her husband had come back from Billings. She said he does something with land transfers." She held his gaze. "I didn't know it mattered then." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "Walter Alderman," Nathaniel said, so flat it had no weather in it at all. "He works as a filing clerk for the Territorial Land Office." He stood up so abruptly the chair scraped. He would have seen the survey submission. He stopped himself, sat back down, pressed his hands flat on the table and breathed. "How do we prove it?" He looked at her. The we had landed in the room between them, and neither of them acknowledged it directly, and both of them heard it completely. "Harlan gets me the formation documents on Western Territorial Partners," he said. If Alderman's name is in there or connected to anyone in there, I can take that to the circuit judge. But I need the documents first. How long will Harlan be? 2 days if the roads are clear. 3 if they're not. Clara nodded. All right. She stood and went back to the stove, because that was what she did when there was nothing immediately actionable. She moved. She worked. She kept the machinery of the place running, so that the people in it had one less thing to worry about. I'll have supper ready at 6. You need to eat before you worry yourself through the floor. He almost smiled. Didn't quite make it, Clara. She turned. Be careful in town. If Alderman is connected to this, his wife. I'm always careful in town, she said, and I gave Helen Alderman the last word I intend to give her in Fenwick's store. She won't get another one. He nodded, picked up his coffee. Went back to his office. She listened to his boots on the stairs and stood at the stove and thought about Thomas Reeves, who she had never met, and who had nonetheless shaped everything about the man down the hall, shaped the careful distances and the deliberate stillness, and the way he trusted things slowly and checked everything twice, and had kept the entire world at arm's length for 6 years because one person had used his trust like a tool and put it away broken. She thought about that, stirring the pot on the stove, and felt something move through her that was not pity. She knew better than to pity Nathaniel Cross, but was close to grief. The kind you feel for damage that can't be undone, only worked around. She would help him work around it. That much she knew with absolute certainty. The next 2 days moved strangely fast and slow in turns, the way time moves when you're waiting for something that matters. Clara kept the household running with the steady, undemonstrative efficiency she had built over 3 months. She cooked, she managed, she listened to the men the way she always did. She noticed Billy was quieter than usual and asked him about it during dish clearing after supper on the second night. It's nothing, Miss Clara, he said, which was how young men said it's something, but I don't know how to start. Billy, he scrubbed at a pot. I heard Mr. Cross and Harlan talking before Harlan left. I didn't mean to. I heard the name Reeves. He looked at her sideways. That man nearly took everything from him once. I was just a kid when it happened, but I remember. The whole county talked about it. He scrubbed harder. I don't want that to happen again to this place. It's not going to, Clara said. You don't know that. No, she said, I don't know it. But I know Nathaniel Cross is not the same man he was 6 years ago. And he's not dealing with it alone this time. She's took the pot from him and dried it. Go get some sleep, Billy. He went. She stood in the kitchen alone for a moment, holding the dry pot, thinking about what she'd just said. He's not dealing with it alone this time. She hadn't planned to say it. It had simply come out, with the straightforward certainty of something true. She put the pot away and went to bed. Harlan came back on the afternoon of the third day, road-dusty and tight-faced in a way that meant he had found something. Clara saw him ride in from the kitchen window. She had bread in the oven and a pot on the stove, and she left both on low heat and went to the front room, because she knew what was coming, and she wanted to be close enough to be useful. Nathaniel met Harlan in the hallway. Clara stayed in the doorway of the front room, which was close enough to hear without being in the way, and Harlan looked at her briefly, and then looked at Nathaniel in a way that asked a silent question, and Nathaniel said, "Tell me." Both of us. Harlan sat down, took out a folded sheaf of papers. Western Territorial Partners was formed 3 years ago in Helena. Primary principal is a man named Gerard Fitch. Fitch is a land speculator with 2 previous actions against ranchers in the territory, both of which resulted in forced sales. He spread the papers on the table. The company's formation filing lists 3 silent investors. One of them is listed under a holding company name that Garrett had to go 2 layers deep to find. Who is it? Nathaniel said. Walter Alderman. The room went absolutely still. Clara heard Nathaniel breathe in, heard him breathe out. Watched his jaw do the thing it did when he was controlling something very carefully. Walter Alderman, he said. Filed 18 months ago. Same month The Territorial Land Office received your survey request. Harlan's voice was careful, factual, the voice of a man delivering information that needs to land without distortion. Garrett thinks Alderman pulled your survey data before it was officially processed. Fed it to Fitch. Fitch went to find the Reeves notes. Where did Fitch find the notes? Clara said. Both men looked at her. You said Reeves transferred them before the settlement, she said, looking at Nathaniel. But who was holding them? Someone had them for 6 years without acting on them. Why now? Nathaniel looked at Harlan. Reeves sold them to a man named Dobbins in 1876, Harlan said. Dobbins died last year. His estate was sold at auction in Helena. Fitch bought the notes out of the estate for $40. He paused. He bought them because Alderman told him they existed. $40. 6 years of waiting, and it had cost someone $40 to potentially take the northern parcels of the Cross Ranch. Clara felt the cold anger of it move through her cleanly, without confusion. Alderman used his position in the land office, she said. He found notes that most people had forgotten existed, fed the information to Fitch, and invested in the company that bought them. All because the survey showed the northern parcels had value. That's what Garrett believes, Harlan said. That's also what he says he can present to the circuit judge if Nathaniel chooses to file. The notes themselves, Nathaniel said. Are they legitimate? That's the complicated part. Harlan looked at the papers. The original debt was real. You owed Reeves money before the partnership went wrong, legitimate business debt. When you settled with Reeves in court, the settlement document discharged Reeves's claims against you. But Garrett says there's an argument that the note Reeves sold to Dobbins in 1876 was sold before the settlement, and that the settlement discharged Reeves's ability to collect not a third party's. So the settlement protected me from Reeves, Nathaniel said slowly. But not from someone who bought the debt from Reeves before the settlement. That's the argument Fitch and his lawyer are prepared to make. The silence in the room was the kind that happens when several people are simultaneously thinking through the same maze and arriving at the same dead ends. Can we beat it? Clara said. Garrett says yes, Harlan said. But it needs to go in front of the circuit judge, and it needs documentation, and it needs to happen before their 60-day window closes. He looked at Nathaniel. There's something else. Tell me. Arthur Haley. He's not just connected to this through Alderman. Harlan pulled out a separate paper. He's listed as a corresponding party in Fitch's letters to the lawyer in Helena. Not an investor. Fitch didn't trust him with money, but Haley was feeding information. About you, about the ranch, about who lived here. He paused, and Clara felt the pause land before he finished the sentence. About Miss Bennett. The room went very quiet. Clara became aware that Nathaniel had turned to look at her with an expression she had not seen before, not the controlled stillness, not the almost smile, not the focused attention she had catalogued over 3 months. Something rawer than any of those. Something that looked like anger on her behalf, which was a different and more complicated thing than anger for oneself. He used her situation, Nathaniel said. Not a question. He told Fitch she was vulnerable, that she could be pressured. Harlan's voice was entirely flat now, the flatness of someone who finds what he's reporting distasteful but is reporting it accurately anyway. He suggested she could be used to access information from inside the ranch. When that didn't work, when she didn't respond the way he expected, he apparently told Fitch to accelerate the timeline. Clara felt something she could not immediately name. It wasn't surprise she had known, on some level, what Arthur Haley was from the moment she read that second letter. But there was a difference between knowing a thing intellectually and having it laid out in plain language in a room with other people, having the full shape of it visible all at once. He had used her. He had used her abandonment, her vulnerability, her desperate situation as a tool in a scheme that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with what he could extract from her proximity to Nathaniel Cross. She had been, in Arthur Haley's calculation, an instrument. Not a person. Clara, Nathaniel said. I'm all right, she said. You don't have to be all right now. I know, she looked at him steadily. I'm all right anyway. Tell me what we need to do. He looked at her for a moment with that raw, unguarded expression, the one she didn't have a catalog entry for yet, and then he nodded and turned back to Harlan. I need to get to the courthouse in Billings, he said. I need to file with the circuit judge before Fitch's lawyer does. Garrett, is he willing to represent? He's willing. He says the case is solid if we move fast. Harlan folded the papers. He also says there's a secondary filing we can make against Alderman for misuse of his position in the land office. That one's cleaner, less arguable. We file both, Nathaniel said. That means Billings. By the end of the no, he stood. Looked at Clara. I'll be gone 3 days, maybe 4. Can you? I've been running this household for 3 months, Clara said. Go. Something moved across his face. He nodded. Harlan goes with me. Dutch is in charge of the hands while we're gone. I'll tell Dutch. He moved toward the hallway. Stopped. Turned back. Clara. He held her gaze with the directness she had come to understand was his version of saying a great deal. When I get back, there are things I want to say to you. Things I should have said before now. I want you to know that. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening, and somewhere in the yard Billy and Rabbit were arguing about something inconsequential, and the ordinary sounds of the ranch went on the way they always did. Indifferent to the fact that something significant had just been said in this room. I'll be here, Clara said. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after his boots faded down the hall. Then she went to the stove and checked the bread and stirred the pot and called out the back door that supper would be at 6, and Dutch was in charge until Mr. Cross returned. Dutch, to his credit, accepted this information with the unflappable solidity that made him Dutch and went back to what he was doing. The 3 days Nathaniel was gone were not quiet days. Clara had not expected them to be. The ranch moved and needed managing, and she managed it, and she kept the household running with the same steady efficiency she always had. And she talked to the men and listened to their concerns, and made decisions she was fairly certain Nathaniel would have made the same way, and she did not let herself spend too much time thinking about what he'd said before he left. Things I want to say to you. She was a thorough person. Thorough people notice things. She noticed this. On the second evening, Margaret Howell came out to the ranch. She arrived in a borrowed buggy in the late afternoon, with a tin of cookies and the direct, capable manner Clara had liked immediately the first time they met. I heard Nathaniel's in Billings, Margaret said, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee Clara poured without being asked. I wanted to make sure you weren't out here alone with no friendly company. I've got 12 ranch hands and enough work for 20 people, Clara said. I'm not exactly alone. You know what I mean. Clara sat down. How much does the town know about the land situation? Margaret wrapped her hands around her cup. More than Nathaniel would like, and less than the whole truth. Helen Alderman has been very quiet the last week, which in my experience means she knows something is coming that she'd rather not be associated with. She paused. Walter Alderman hasn't been to his office in 4 days. Clara looked at her. I have friends in useful places, Margaret said mildly. So does the circuit judge, incidentally. Judge Harmon is not a man who takes kindly to people misusing territorial office positions for personal gain. I thought you should know that. Why are you telling me this? Margaret considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because you arrived in this town 3 months ago with nothing, and you've built something real, and some people in Willow Creek would like to see it stand. She met Clara's eyes. I'm one of them. You deserved better than the welcome this town gave you. Some of us know that. Clara looked at her coffee. She thought about the platform, the narrow-faced woman's voice carrying across Fenwick's store. That's the one. The abandoned bride. She thought about $11.40 and 3 trunks and a letter signed yours sincerely. Thank you, Margaret, she said. Don't thank me. Just come to town once this is sorted out and have coffee at the schoolhouse. I mean to introduce you to some people who are worth knowing." She stayed 2 hours and left before dark, and Clara watched the buggy go and felt the particular warmth of a friendship that had appeared without fanfare and without agenda and was exactly what it presented itself as. She was still thinking about it when hoofbeats came fast up the road just past 9 o'clock, too fast, too urgent, and she was at the door before she consciously decided to move. It was Rabbit, on red, which meant he'd taken the fastest horse, which meant something was wrong. "Miss Clara," he was barely out of the saddle. "Rider came through an hour ago from the East Road. Said there's a man camped at the boundary of the North Pasture. He's been there since this morning. Had surveying equipment. The North Pasture, the northern parcels." Clara felt the cold move through her, fast and decisive. "Wait, Dutch," she said. "Tell him to take 2 men and ride out to the north boundary. Don't approach the man, just make sure he sees them. I want him to know someone's watching." "Yes, ma'am." He was back on the horse before she finished the sentence. "Rabbit," he pulled up. "Don't do anything, just be visible. You understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He wrote. She went inside and to Nathaniel's office, where she had never gone uninvited, and she opened the desk drawer he had shown her if anything happens. The ranch papers are here, and she found the settlement document from 6 years ago. The one that discharged Reeves's claims, and she sat at Nathaniel's desk in the lamplight and read every word of it. She was a thorough person. She read it 3 times. And on the 3rd reading, she found it buried in the legal language of the final paragraph, easy to miss if you were looking at the whole and not the parts. The settlement discharged not only Reeves's claims, but any claims arising from the original partnership agreement of 1,870, which predated the sale of the note to Dobbins by 6 years. The note Dobbins bought, the note Fitch had paid $40 for, had arisen from the original partnership agreement. If that language held, and she believed it did, the settlement had discharged the note's validity before Dobbins ever owned it. She sat at Nathaniel's desk with the document in her hands and felt the click of it, the piece fitting into place, clean and definitive. Then she found paper, found a pen, and wrote out exactly what she had found in plain language that a judge could read without a lawyer's translation, with the relevant paragraph copied out verbatim and her analysis below it, and she signed her name at the bottom. She put it with the settlement document in an envelope and wrote Nathaniel's name on the front. Then she went back to the kitchen, banked the stove, and sat at the table and waited for Dutch to come back from the north boundary, because she was not going to sleep until she knew the ranch was clear. Dutch came back at 10:30. The surveyor had packed up and gone when he saw 3 riders on the boundary. No confrontation, no trouble. Just a man who had come to measure something and left when he understood he'd been seen. "Good," Clara said. "Thank you, Dutch. Get some sleep." "Miss Clara," Dutch said, from the doorway, in his whole-sentence voice. "You did good today." She looked at him. He had already gone back out. She sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after that. The ranch was quiet around her. The house that had felt like an assignment 3 months ago felt, now, like something she had a stake in, something she had worked for and worried over and helped to protect. Not because it was her job, but because it mattered to her the way things only matter when you have put real pieces of yourself into them. She thought about a man in Billings right now, in a courthouse, fighting for this place with the weapons he had available. She had found him one more weapon. She hoped it was enough. She thought it was. She went upstairs. She latched her door. She lay in the dark and listened to the Montana night, enormous and quiet and indifferent and utterly, completely home. She was still awake when she heard hoofbeats on the road before dawn, 2 horses, familiar rhythm, and she was at the window before they reached the gate. Nathaniel, and Harlan behind him, 3 days, he'd said. Maybe 4. It had been 2.5. She was downstairs with coffee on before he came through the door, still road-dusted, still in his traveling coat, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at her and said, "It's done." The judge signed the order this morning. Fitch has to surrender the notes. Alderman's been removed from his position pending a full investigation. Clara set down the coffee pot. And Arthur Haley? Named as a corresponding party in Fitch's scheme. The judge referred it to the territorial attorney. His voice was very even, very careful. He won't be doing business in this territory again. Good, she said. He came into the kitchen, saw the envelope on the table with his name on it. Picked it up. Read what was inside, read it again. You found this in the settlement document, he said. Third reading, she said. It was in the last paragraph. He set the papers down, looked at her across the kitchen table with the raw, unguarded expression she still didn't have a full catalog entry for, only she was beginning to understand what it meant. I told you there were things I wanted to say when I got back, he said. You did, she said. Clara. He didn't move toward her. He simply stood at the other side of the table, in the early morning light, road-dusty and exhausted and more present than she had ever seen him. I need you to know that nothing about your being here has been charitable. Not from the first day. You have kept this place running and these men fed and this household together, and you found in a legal document in one evening what I might have missed entirely, and none of that is it's not charity. It's not, he stopped. He was not a man who ran out of words because he used them carelessly. He ran out now because he was choosing them with greater care than usual. You are not someone I took in. You are someone this place needed, and I want you to know I understand the difference. The kitchen was very quiet. I know the difference too, Clara said. I've known it for a while. I should have said it sooner. You said it now, she said. That's what matters. He came around the table then, not quickly, not with any flourish, the way he did everything purposefully, without waste, and he took both her hands in his and looked at her with those careful, direct eyes and said, I'm going to say the rest of it. When I've slept and I don't look like something the road dragged in. But I wanted you to know it's coming. Clara looked at him. At this man who had picked up her trunk on a train platform, because something in him recognized something in her, who had given her a room with a latch on the door and a job that was real and people who were worth knowing, who had told her his worst story in a quiet room after supper and let her find the peace that protected his home. I'll be here, she said. It was the second time she'd said it. It meant the same thing it had meant the first time. It meant more than it had the first time. He pressed her hands once gently and let go, and went to get the sleep he'd said he needed, and Clara stood in the kitchen in the early morning light and listened to the Cross Ranch come awake around her horses' voices. The particular sound of a working place that knew what it was for. She poured herself coffee. She started breakfast. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning after Judge Harmon left, Clara woke before dawn the way she always did, and the first thing she noticed was that the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just different the way a room feels when something that has been held under pressure for a long time has finally been released, and the air has had a chance to settle back into itself. She lay in the dark for a moment, listening to the ranch breathe around her, and then she got up and went downstairs and started the stove, because that was what she did, and some things were worth keeping even when everything else was changing. Nathaniel came down at 5:30. She heard him on the stairs, the particular rhythm of his step she had learned the way she'd learned everything else about this place, by paying attention long enough that it became automatic. He came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, and she felt him look at her before she turned around. You're up early, he said. I'm always up early. Earlier than usual. She turned and looked at him. He was watching her with that open, careful expression, the one she had decided, after considerable study, meant that he was saying something with his face that he hadn't yet organized into words. I'm fine, she said. I know you are. He came in and poured his own coffee, which he had started doing sometime in the third month, not waiting for her to pour it, just doing it himself, the small, incremental shift of a man becoming comfortable in a shared space. I wanted to ask you something. Ask. He sat down, wrapped both hands around the cup the way he did when he was thinking something through. When Harlan read you the part about Haley, that he had been using your situation from the beginning. Your arrival here, the way you came paused. What did that feel like? Clara considered the question. Nathaniel did not ask careless questions, which meant this one had weight he wasn't showing yet. It felt like confirmation, she said, of something I already suspected but hadn't let myself fully believe. That he never saw you as a person, that I was a calculation to him from the start. She sat across from him. Before I arrived here in Cincinnati, when his letters were coming and I was writing back, I believed I had found something real. I was careful, I wasn't naive, I didn't rush. She looked at her coffee. But I wanted it to be real so much that I let that wanting do some of the work of discernment for me. And I missed things I should have seen. What things? He never asked me what I wanted, she said. Not once in 8 months. He asked what I could do. He asked about my domestic skills and my temperament and whether I was healthy. He asked practical things, useful things, but he never once asked what I hoped for. What I was afraid of. What kind of life I was trying to build. She looked up. A man who sees you as a person asks those questions. A man who sees you as a resource does not. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. I asked you if you had anywhere to go. You asked if I needed help, she said. That's different from the questions I just described, and we both know it. But the way you asked, she paused. You asked because you wanted to know the truth. Not because you needed the answer to serve a purpose. She met his eyes. I knew the difference. Even then, he held her gaze. You knew the difference on a train platform after reading the worst letter of your life. I was extremely motivated to read people accurately at that particular moment, she said. He almost smiled. Fair point. They sat in the kitchen while the light came up outside, and Clara made breakfast, and Nathaniel drank his coffee and went over the morning's work in his head the way he always did, and the conversation moved into the ordinary things, the fence, the cattle rotation, the question of whether Red's leg was fully healed or whether he needed another week of rest. But something had shifted again, incrementally, the way things between them always shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the steady, purposeful accumulation of a man who built things to last. It was Rabbit who broke the ordinary rhythm of the morning. He appeared at the kitchen door at 8:30 with the expression of a young man carrying information. He was uncertain how to deliver the particular combination of excitement and anxiety that Clara had learned to read as something. Has happened, and I don't know if it's bad or good. There's a woman in the yard, he said. Nathaniel looked up from his papers. What woman? Don't know her, she came on horseback. Alone, he paused. She asked for Miss Clara. Clara set down the dish towel. Nathaniel looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said the name that had entered both their minds simultaneously, because saying it would give it weight it might not deserve. I'll go, Clara said. I'll come with you, Nathaniel said. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. He set down his papers and stood up. I want to. They went out together. The woman in the yard was somewhere around 40, well dressed in the way of a woman who had money, but wore it practically rather than for display. She was sitting her horse with the easy competence of someone who had been riding since childhood. And she had the kind of face that had once been conventionally pretty and had grown into something considerably more interesting, with age strong-boned, direct, with eyes that moved quickly and assessed faster. She looked at Clara first, then at Nathaniel, then back at Clara. Miss Bennett? She said. Mrs. Cross, Nathaniel said quietly, from beside her. The correction surprised Clara, and she saw it surprise the woman too, both of them recalibrating in the same half-second. Forgive me, the woman said. I wasn't aware, that is. I had heard she collected herself with the efficiency of someone who dealt with unexpected information regularly. My name is Frances Dobbins. My late father was Elias Dobbins. The yard went very still. Elias Dobbins. The man who had bought Reeves's note in 1876 for reasons that were now considerably clearer in retrospect. The man whose estate had been sold at auction in Helena. The man whose $40 paper had nearly taken the northern parcels of the Cross Ranch. Nathaniel's expression was doing the controlled stillness, but Clara could read underneath it now, and what she saw was not hostility. It was the focused, assessing attention of a man trying to determine what kind of thing this was before he decided how to meet it. "Miss Dobbins," he said, "get down and come inside." She dismounted with the easy movement of a capable horsewoman, handed her reins to Rabbit, who had appeared with impeccable timing, and followed them into the house. Clara put coffee on, because coffee was what you did when something important needed to be said, and Frances Dobbins sat at the kitchen table with her hat in her lap and the composed, slightly strained expression of a woman who had rehearsed something on the road here and was now deciding whether the rehearsed version was still the right one. "I came because I found out what my father's estate was used for," she said, without preamble, when Clara set the coffee in front of her. "I live in San Francisco. I was not involved in the auction. I had instructed the estate attorney to handle everything, and he did, and I trusted that he had done so appropriately." She looked at Nathaniel directly. "When the proceedings in Helena became public, a colleague of mine sent me a newspaper account. I read it on a Thursday. I was on a train east by Friday morning." "Why?" Nathaniel said. "Because my father bought that note in 1876 for reasons I did not know about until I read the settlement documents from your original case against Reeves." She paused. "My father and Thomas Reeves were in business together before Reeves came to Montana." "Not honestly in business. My father was not an honest man, Mr. Cross. I have known that for a long time, and I have spent a significant portion of my adult life dealing with the consequences of it." She looked at her coffee. "He bought that note because Reeves told him it would be valuable, eventually. He was storing it, waiting. He died before the waiting paid off, and his estate sold it without knowing what it was." The kitchen was quiet. "I am not here to ask for anything," Frances Dobbins said. "I am here because my father's dishonesty was used as a weapon against you, and I wanted to say to your face, not through a lawyer's letter, that I am sorry for that. And because..." She reached into her coat and produced an envelope. Laid it on the table. "The $40 paid at auction for the note came from my father's estate, which came in part from his business with Reeves. I have had it calculated with 6 years of interest, what portion of that money might reasonably be traced back to the original partnership with Reeves that wronged you." She pushed the envelope toward Nathaniel. He didn't touch it. "Miss Dobbins," he said, "what exactly is in that envelope?" "A banker's draft," she said, "for the amount I calculated. It won't undo what was done. I know that. But I am not willing to benefit from money that came from a theft against you, and I am not willing to let my father's legacy be that note and what it was used for." She met his eyes with the particular directness of someone who has made a decision they are completely at peace with. "Take it or don't take it, that is genuinely your choice." "I have done what I came to do." Nathaniel looked at the envelope. Then at Clara. Clara looked at Frances Dobbins, at the long road on her face, the carefully held composure, the practical clothes and capable hands and eyes that had clearly seen the underside of inherited dishonesty and decided to deal with it directly rather than pretend it wasn't there. She thought about a woman sitting across a kitchen table offering something that could not fix the past and might help the future and was given entirely without condition. She thought about herself on a different day walking into a man's office to hand him a letter that was being used against him. The instinct was the same: see a wrong, do what you can about it, accept whatever comes of it with your chin up. "Miss Dobbins," Clara said, "have you eaten today?" Frances Dobbins blinked. "I know, I rode since before dawn." "Then stay for breakfast," Clara said. "Whatever we decide about the envelope can wait until after." Frances looked at her with an expression that cracked open just slightly around the edges, the look of a woman who had been braced for a harder reception and had not quite reorganized herself to handle a kind one. "Thank you," she said. "I would like that." Nathaniel picked up the envelope, put it in his shirt pocket, said nothing about it for the rest of the meal. After Frances Dobbins had eaten and had her horse watered and was preparing to ride back toward town, she paused beside her horse and looked at Clara with a frank, direct gaze. "I heard in town. What happened when you arrived here?" she said. "What Haley did. What the town did." She paused. "And I see what you've built in the month since." Her eyes moved briefly to the house, the yard, the men going about their work. "You should be proud of yourself, Mrs. Cross." "I'm working on that," Clara said. "Work faster," Frances said, with the first real smile Clara had seen from her, brief and genuine. "It's overdue," she wrote out. Clara watched the dust settle and thought about overdue things and the work of claiming them. She was still thinking about it when Billy came to find her an hour later, with the expression of a young man who had been holding information for as long as he possibly could and had reached his limit. "Miss Clara," he said, "there are 2 men from the Willow Creek Gazette at the gate. They want to talk to Mr. Cross about the Fitch case and the alderman business." Clara looked at him. "Does Mr. Cross know they're there?" "He's in the barn with the circuit fence inventory." "I didn't want to interrupt him if you thought I'll go," Clara said. Billy's eyebrows went up. I'll go," she said again, drying her hands on her apron. "Tell them to wait at the gate. I'll be there in 2 minutes." She was there in 90 seconds. The 2 men from the Gazette were both younger than she expected, one with a notebook already open, one with the slightly aggressive forward posture of a man who has learned that hesitation in journalism costs you the story. They looked at her with the transparent recalculation of people who had expected someone else. "Mrs. Cross," the one with the notebook said, "we were hoping to speak with your husband about." "Mr. Cross is occupied with the inventory," Clara said pleasantly. "I'm happy to speak with you. We were hoping for Mr. Cross specifically," the other one said. "Mr. Cross will tell you the same things I'm going to tell you," Clara said with the same pleasant firmness. "And he'll use fewer words. So you might actually prefer this." She looked at the notebook. "What do you want to know?" There was a pause. The one with the notebook looked at his colleague. His colleague looked at Clara. Something in the way she was standing, the straight back, the level gaze, the complete and utter absence of any indication that she found this situation awkward, apparently communicated something that settled the question. The notebook man opened to a fresh page. "Can you tell us, in your own words, how the fraud scheme against the Cross Ranch was discovered?" Clara told them. She told them accurately in plain language, without embellishment or false modesty. She explained the survey, the alderman connection, the Dobbins note and how it had been traced, the settlement clause in the original discharge document. She did not describe herself as the hero of any part of it, but she described her role accurately, because accuracy mattered and false modesty was its own form of dishonesty. When she finished, the notebook man looked at his pages, and then at her. "Mrs. Cross," he said, "were you trained in law?" "No," she said. "I was trained to read carefully. 3 times through is when the important things show up." He wrote that down. "One more question," he said. "You arrived in Willow Creek under difficult circumstances 4 months ago." "You came," as he hesitated, "as a woman with nowhere to go," Clara said. "You can say it plainly. I'm not embarrassed by where I started." "How do you think about that now, looking back from where you are?" Clara thought about the platform, the letter, the cold. The 3 trunks and $11.40, and a town full of strangers and one man who had picked up her luggage and not looked back to see if she was following. "I think the worst day of my life put me exactly where I needed to be," she said. "And I think the people who tried to use my difficult circumstances as a weakness didn't understand that a woman who has already lost everything is not afraid of them." She looked at him steadily. "You can print that." He printed it. The article ran 3 days later. Margaret Howell sent a copy out to the ranch with a note that said simply, "Well said." Coffee Tuesday. M. Nathaniel read the article at the kitchen table without comment. When he finished, he folded it carefully and set it down and looked at Clara across the table. 3 times through is when the important things show up, he said. I said it to the judge too, she said. It appears to be my philosophy. It's a good one. He folded the article again. Did they quote you accurately? Exactly. Good. He picked up his coffee. You're better at talking to journalists than I would have been. You would have said 4 words and closed the gate. 3 words, he said. I would have been efficient. She laughed. He watched her laugh with that expression she still found the most disarming of all his expressions, the one that looked like a man who cannot quite believe his luck and is deeply grateful for it, and has no idea that his face is showing any of this. She knew she had been thorough about it. That evening, after supper, after the hands went to the bunkhouse and Harlan turned in and the house was quiet, Nathaniel took the envelope Francis Dobbins had left and opened it at the kitchen table with Clara beside him. The banker's draft was significant, not life-changing. The Cross Ranch was solid enough that it didn't need life-changing, but significant. Real. What do you want to do with it? Clara asked. He looked at the draft for a moment. The school on Birch Street, he said. Margaret Howell's school. I heard her say last month the roof needs replacing before winter. Clara looked at him. Anonymous, he said. I don't want it's not, for he stopped. It came from a wrong thing. Let it do a right thing. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had kept himself at careful distances for 6 years because one person had used his trust and broken it, and who had nevertheless taken in a woman from a train platform and given her work and a room with a latch on the door. Who had told her his worst story in a quiet room and meant it as trust. Who had ridden to Billings and fought for his land and come back and come to find her before he slept. Who had just decided, without fanfare, that money that came from dishonesty should go to children learning to read. Yes, she said, that's exactly right. He folded the draft. Put it in the envelope. Set it on the table to be handled in the morning. Clara, he said. I know, she said, I haven't said it yet. I know what you're going to say. Then let me say it anyway. He turned to look at her directly, with all that careful, concentrated weight. I love you. I have for a while. I wasn't ready to say it until I was certain I understood what it meant, not just what I felt, but what I intended to do about it, for the rest of my life, and whether I was a man who could be trusted with it. He held her gaze. I believe I am. I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the Montana night went on in its enormous, indifferent, beautiful way. I love you too, Clara said. I've been thorough about that as well. He took her hand across the table, held it the way he held things he valued carefully, without show, with the complete and genuine attention of a man who understands that some things are worth more than anything he could put a number to. I know, he said, and in the kitchen of the Cross Ranch, in the last quiet hour of a day that had held justice and honesty, and a stranger's reparation, and a newspaper article, and the most important 3 words in the English language, said by a man who chose every word with care in all of that. 2 people who had both been broken by trust and had found their way, slowly and carefully and thoroughly, back to it, sat together in the warm and let the rest of the world stay outside where it belonged. Tomorrow the fence needed checking. The milk cow question was still unresolved. Margaret Howell's school roof needed fixing, and there were arrangements to make about that. 2 afternoons a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays were already on the calendar. The ordinary machinery of a real life was already running, and would keep running, and demanded nothing more dramatic from either of them than to show up and do the work. That was enough. That was everything. Clara Cross leaned back in her chair and listened to the Cross Ranch settle around her into the deep, complete silence of a place that was exactly what it was supposed to be. She had arrived with nothing. She had stayed and built and fought and found and given and refused and chosen. And now she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with, and every difficult mile that had brought her here had been, in the end, entirely worth the traveling. he slept until noon. Clara knew because she heard him move at 11:30 boots on the floor above the kitchen. The particular creak of the second board from the window that she had learned to recognize the way you learn the sounds of a house that has become yours. She had breakfast food waiting, covered on the back of the stove, because she had made it at 6 and kept it warm for 6 hours without being asked to, and without announcing that she was doing it. When he came downstairs, he looked like himself again, the road dust gone, the exhaustion cleared, the careful steadiness restored. He sat at the kitchen table, and she put food in front of him and poured coffee and sat down across from him with her own cup, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, which was its own kind of conversation. "Dutch told me about the man on the north boundary," Nathaniel said. "Rabbit saw him first," Clara said. "I just told Dutch to make sure he knew he'd been seen." "That was the right call, I know." He looked at her over his coffee. "You're not going to make this easy for me, are you?" "Make what easy?" "Saying what I said I was going to say." Clara set down her cup. "I'm sitting right here, Nathaniel. I'm not making it anything. I'm just sitting here." He looked at his plate, looked back at her, and then Nathaniel Cross, who chose his words the way other men chose their tools carefully, without waste, said, "I have spent 6 years making sure I didn't need anyone. I was good at it. I was probably too good at it." He paused. "And then you came off that train in somebody else's traveling dress with 3 trunks and $11 and nowhere to go. And I watched you stand on that platform and hold yourself together with everything you had, and something in me," he stopped. Something that had been very quiet for a very long time stopped being quiet. Clara felt it move through her, that sentence, the way a struck bell moves through the air around it, not loud, not dramatic, but resonant. Reaching into places she hadn't realized she'd been keeping still. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want you to know that going in. I'm not a man who finds the right words on the first try, or says things at the moment they should be said. I held what I needed to say to you for 2 months longer than I should have, and I went to Billings without saying it. And I came back and found you'd stayed up half the night watching the north boundary, and found the piece of the settlement document that may have saved this ranch. And he set down his fork. I don't want you to be my housekeeper, Clara." The kitchen was very quiet. "I know what I want you to be," he said. "I'm asking if you know too." Clara looked at him across the table. This man who had picked up her trunk without being asked, and not looked back to see if she was following. Who had given her work that was real, and a room that was hers, and people worth knowing. Who had told her the worst thing that ever happened to him in a quiet room after supper, and meant it as trust. Who had pressed her hands in this kitchen before dawn and said, "I'll say the rest of it when I don't look like something the road dragged in," and had come back and kept his word. "I know," she said. "And I've known for a while," she said. "I've been thorough about it." That full, genuine, surprised laugh, the one she had only heard once before, the one that lived in the territory well past the almost smile, came out of him again, and it was the best sound she had heard in 4 months. Which was saying something, given that she had spent 4 months surrounded by a ranch full of people who were not quiet. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat like that in the kitchen of the Cross Ranch on a Wednesday noon in November, with the stove warm and the coffee hot, and the rest of the day arranged around them, like something that finally made sense. "I'm not easy to live with," he said. "I've lived with you for 4 months," she said. "I have a thorough understanding of what I'm agreeing to. I keep odd hours, I know. I've been leaving food on fence posts for you. I don't talk much. You talk exactly enough," she said. "You just make every word do more work than most people make 10 do. I've learned to listen accordingly." He looked at her. "When did you get this good at reading people?" "When I started cooking for 12 men who each have a different way of saying they're unhappy with the beans," she said. "You develop skills." He turned her hand over in both of his, looking at it the way he looked at things he valued, practically, without sentiment, but genuinely. "I'm going to ask you to marry me," he said, properly. "Soon." I want you to know that's where this is going, so you can decide now whether you want to run. I've had 4 months to run, Clara said. I made biscuits instead. That's a yes. That's a yes. He pressed her hand once the same way he had before dawn, the gesture that said more than the words around it, and let go. Because there was a ranch running around them and a day's work waiting, and Nathaniel Cross did not stop the machinery of a working place for sentiment, which was fine, because Clara didn't need him to. She picked up her coffee. He picked up his fork. And the most important conversation of both their lives concluded over breakfast food that had been keeping warm on the back of the stove for 6 hours, which was, Clara thought, exactly the right way for it to happen. She was still thinking about it 2 hours later when the buckboard from Willow Creek came up the road. She saw it from the kitchen window and didn't think much of it. Supplies came out from town regularly, and Harlan had put in an order before he left for Billings. But then the buckboard stopped in the yard, and the man who climbed down was not the usual delivery man from Fenwick's store. It was Judge Harmon. Clara dried her hands on her apron and went to the door. He was a compact man somewhere past 60, with a white beard trimmed close and the unhurried manner of someone who had been the most important person in most rooms for long enough that he no longer needed to announce it. He had a younger man with him, a court clerk, by the look of him, carrying a leather satchel. Miss Bennet, the judge said, which meant he knew who she was, which was interesting. Is Nathaniel Cross available? He is, she said. Come in. She brought them to the front room and went to find Nathaniel, who was with Dutch at the south fence checking the repair work from the storm. She walked out and said simply, Judge Harmon is in the front room, and watched Nathaniel's expression shift through about 4 different things in the space of a second before it settled back into the careful steadiness. How does he look? Nathaniel said. Like a man who's come to tell you something rather than ask you something, Clara said. Come on. He came. Harlan materialized from the direction of the barn, because Harlan always materialized when something important was happening, and Clara let him in too, because he had earned every room in this house. Judge Harmon shook Nathaniel's hand with the direct, assessing grip of a man who still formed opinions by feel. I won't take much of your time, he said. I'm here because I wanted to tell you myself, rather than have it come through the mail. The territorial attorney filed this morning against Arthur Haley. Fraud, conspiracy to defraud, misrepresentation in a legal proceeding. He sat down in the chair Clara indicated. We've also found that Haley was working with Reeves, not just with Fitch. The original note sale to Dobbins in 1876 was structured by Haley. He was practicing land law in the territory then without a proper license. The room went very still. Nathaniel sat forward. Haley was involved with Reeves 6 years ago. We believe so. We're still establishing the full extent of it. The judge looked at him directly. I want you to understand what that means. This was not a scheme that started 3 months ago when your survey results leaked. This started before that, possibly years before. Haley or someone working with him may have been waiting for the right moment to activate the Dobbins note. They were waiting for the land to be worth enough, Clara said. Both men looked at her. The survey showed the northern parcels had significant value, she said. Before the survey, the notes weren't worth activating because the land wasn't worth fighting for in court. They needed the survey to make the collection worth the legal cost. She looked at the judge. Alderman was in the land office. He could see survey requests as they came in. He would have known the moment Nathaniel filed for the survey that the parcel was potentially valuable. Judge Harmon looked at her for a moment with an expression of measured respect. That is, in essence, exactly what the territorial attorney's investigation has established, he said. You have a clear mind, Miss Bennet. She found the settlement clause, Nathaniel said. The paragraph in the original discharge. Garrett's case in Billings was built around it. I'm aware, the judge said. Garrett mentioned it. He said it was the strongest single piece of the argument. He looked at Clara steadily. You'd law, Miss Bennet? I read carefully, she said. Third time through is usually when the important things show up. The judge made a sound that might have been amusement from a man who allowed himself less of it. He turned back to Nathaniel. The notes have been declared invalid under the settlement discharge. Western Territorial Partners has no claim. Fitch is facing his own proceedings. Walter Alderman has been removed from office and is under investigation. And Arthur Haley, he paused, with the pause of a man delivering a final verdict. Arthur Haley will not practice law, conduct land business, or engage in any commercial activity in this territory again. I've seen to that personally. Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. Then thank you, Judge. Don't thank me. Thank the woman who found the clause. He stood. Extended his hand to Clara. Miss Bennett, it was a pleasure. She shook his hand. He left with his clerk, the buckboard turning back toward town in the November afternoon, and the yard was quiet again, and the Cross Ranch was whole. Harlan looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Clara. Clara looked at her apron, which she was still wearing, and thought that she probably should have taken it off before meeting the circuit judge. Well, Harlan said. Well, Nathaniel agreed. I'm going back to the barn, Harlan said. And then, because he was Harlan, he stopped in the doorway and looked at both of them with the flat, certain expression he used for things that were obvious to everyone but the people most directly involved. It's about time, he said, and went. Clara looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Clara. About time for what? She said. Don't ask me, he said. I've learned not to ask Harlan to explain himself. It only leads to more questions. She laughed. He smiled the full smile, the real one, not the almost version, and it did to her exactly what she had known for some time it would do if she ever saw it properly. She went back to the kitchen. He followed, poured himself more coffee, and leaned against the counter while she started supper preparation, and they talked about what needed doing in the next week, the fence repair, the supply inventory, the question of the milk cow that they'd been discussing for 2 months without resolving, and it was entirely ordinary and entirely extraordinary, and Clara held both of those things at the same time without any difficulty at all. The news reached Willow Creek by the following morning. Small towns ran on information the way ranches ran on water. It traveled fast and touched everything, and by 9 o'clock on Thursday, the arrest and removal of Walter Alderman had moved through every business on the main street and most of the residential ones. Clara heard about it from Margaret Howell, who appeared at the ranch before noon with the particular energy of a woman who has been waiting for justice and is gratified to find it arrived on schedule. Helen Alderman left on the morning stage. Margaret said, sitting at the kitchen table with the coffee Clara had already poured. Walter was taken to Helena last night. The whole street was talking about nothing else by 8 o'clock. And Arthur Haley? Clara said, gone. Margaret wrapped her hands around her cup. Eugenia Hartfield, the woman he was engaged to, the one he chose over, she stopped. Looked at Clara. Well, she ended the engagement the moment the territorial attorney's filing became public. Her father apparently had a great deal to say about it, none of it printable in the local paper. She paused. He was seen leaving on the afternoon stage yesterday with 2 bags and the expression of a man who understands that he has run out of options. Clara thought about a letter. 3 paragraphs. A cheerful signature. She thought about the woman who had stood on a platform reading it, holding herself together with everything she had, with $11.40 and nowhere to go. She felt nothing for Arthur Haley, not anger that had burned clean and was gone. Not satisfaction in his downfall that felt too close to the kind of smallness she had spent 4 months growing out of. Just a clean, complete absence, the way a room feels when something that was taking up space has been removed and the air has settled back into the corners. Good, she said. Finally, Margaret studied her. You're all right, I am, Clara said. I genuinely am. I know, Margaret smiled, warm and direct. That's what I came to see. She drank her coffee. Now I have a proposition. The schools board is looking for someone to help with the older students. 2 afternoons a week reading, arithmetic, correspondence skills. I've seen how you manage this household and these men, and I've heard what Judge Harmon said about your mind. I think you'd be extraordinary at it." She paused. "Paid work your own. Nothing to do with the ranch." Clara looked at her. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you something of your own," Margaret said. "Because you're a woman who needs something of her own. And because those children need someone who knows what it is to stand in a hard place and find a way forward." She put down her cup. "Think about it." Clara thought about it for about 10 seconds. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." Margaret left an hour later, and Clara stood in the kitchen thinking about 2 afternoons a week in a schoolroom with children who needed someone to show them that hard places were survivable. That reading a document carefully enough on the third pass could change the outcome of something that mattered. That knowing your own worth was not a luxury but a necessity. She told Nathaniel at supper. He listened the way he listened to everything fully, without interruption, with that concentrated attention that made you feel like the most important person in whatever room you were in with him. When she finished, he said, "What days?" "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons." "I'll make sure the wagon's free. I can drive myself." "I know you can," he said. "I'll make sure the wagon's free." She looked at him. He looked back at her with the plain, direct eyes that said more than most people managed in paragraphs. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's your work. I'm just making sure the wagon's available." Billy, who had been listening from the end of the table with the unconcealed interest of a young man who had not yet learned to pretend he wasn't, said, "Miss Clara, does that mean you're staying?" The table went quiet. All 12 men, without apparent coordination, stopped eating at roughly the same moment, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how much her answer mattered to this particular group of people. She looked down the table, at Billy's open, hopeful face, at Dutch, who was looking at his plate with the careful neutrality of a man who cared very much, at Ernesto, who had stopped humming, at Rabbit, who was frozen with a biscuit halfway to his mouth, and the expression of a boy trying very hard to look like he wasn't holding his breath, at Harlan, who was looking at her with the flat, certain expression that already knew the answer, at Nathaniel, at the head of the table, who was looking at her the way he'd looked at her on the wagon bench, heading north like he was waiting to find out what kind of person she was, and already suspected, and was glad to be right. "Yes," Clara said, "I'm staying." The table erupted not dramatically, because these were working men, not theatrical ones, but with the genuine, unguarded relief of people who had been hoping for something and found out they were going to get it. Billy made a sound that was not quite a word. Rabbit finally got the biscuit to his mouth. Dutch said, in his whole sentence voice, "Good," and returned to his supper, which from Dutch was equivalent to a standing ovation. Harlan picked up his coffee cup, set it down, picked it up again. Said nothing, his mustache moved once. That was enough. After supper, after the dishes, after the men had gone to the bunkhouse, and the house had settled into its evening quiet, Nathaniel found her in the kitchen doing the final tasks of the day, the things she did automatically now, without thought. Banking the stove and setting the breakfast things and checking the larder against tomorrow's needs. He leaned in the doorway the way he had that first evening, 4 months ago, watching her work. Then he said, "Come outside for a minute." She dried her hands and followed him onto the porch, into the November night that was cold and clear and full of stars the way Montana nights were extravagant with them. Stars in quantities that still surprised her after 4 months. He stood beside her and looked at the sky for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and held something out. Clara looked at it. It was a ring, plain gold, simple, the kind of ring a working man buys when he wants something honest rather than impressive. She looked at it and then at him. "I said I was going to ask properly," he said. So, she said. Clara Bennett. He held her gaze with everything he had, all that careful, concentrated directness, all that quiet weight. "You came off a train 4 months ago with nothing, and you built something here that is as much a part of this place as anything I've ever put into it." You kept these men fed and this house running, and you found the clause in a document that saved the northern parcels, and you stayed up half the night watching the boundary, and you held this ranch together while I was in Billings. And you did all of it without being asked to do more than cook and keep house. He paused. I'm not asking you to be my housekeeper anymore. I'm asking you to be my partner. My wife. The person who stands beside me on this ranch and helps me decide what it becomes. Another pause. I'm asking because I want you here for your own sake and not for what you do. And because this place is better with you in it than it ever was before you came. And he stopped. I am considerably better, he said, than I was before you came. Clara looked at the ring in his outstretched hand. She thought about a lot of things in a very short time: the platform, the letter, the wagon bench, the kitchen table, the settlement clause, the north boundary, the judge's handshake, Margaret's proposition. 12 men going quiet when she said she was staying. She thought about the woman who had stood in a train station with nowhere to go and decided quietly and internally to stop being left behind. She thought about everything that woman had built since then. Yes, she said, obviously yes. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She suspected, knowing him, that this was not an accident, that he had found a way, with the thoroughness that matched her own, to know the right size. Obviously, he repeated. You said it yourself. I'm a thorough person. She looked at the ring on her hand in the starlight. I've been thorough about this for quite some time. He put his arm around her, not dramatically, not with any flourish, just the solid, certain warmth of a man settling into a decision he had no intention of revisiting, and they stood on the porch of the Cross Ranch in the Montana night and looked at the impossible quantity of stars above them. Nathaniel, she said after a while. Yeah, Billy is going to be insufferable about this tomorrow morning. Extremely agreed. Rabbit will probably cry. Almost certainly. Harlan will say 2 words and look like he predicted the entire thing from the beginning. He'll be right, Nathaniel said. He always is. I find it best not to examine how. She laughed. He tightened his arm around her, and above them the Montana sky went on, indifferent and enormous and brilliant, the way it always was, the way it would keep being long after every story told beneath it had found its ending. They went inside eventually, because it was cold and there was a ranch to run tomorrow and a world of ordinary work waiting to be done. And ordinary work was what their life was made of, and neither of them would have changed that for anything more glamorous. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in December, with the ground frozen solid and the sky the particular sharp blue of a Montana winter, Clara Bennett became Clara Cross in front of Judge Harmon and Margaret Howell, and 12 ranch hands who had all put on their cleanest shirts without being asked to. Harlan stood beside Nathaniel. He cried exactly once, briefly, turned away so no one would see it, and then recovered himself and said nothing about it for the rest of the day, and everyone who saw it had the good sense to say nothing either. Billy did not cry. He was loudly, comprehensively, magnificently happy, in the way of young men who have decided that a good thing has happened and want everyone within a considerable radius to share their opinion on the matter. He made a speech at the table afterward that no one had asked him to make, and that went on considerably longer than any reasonable speech needed to, and Clara listened to every word of it and loved every word of it, because it was Billy. And Billy meant everything he said and said everything he meant. There was something precious about that in a world that had not always been so generous with her. Dutch shook Nathaniel's hand and said, "Good." He shook Clara's hand and said, "Good." That was the entirety of his contribution to the ceremony, and it was, from Dutch, an extraordinary outpouring of feeling. Rabbit gave Clara a pair of mittens. He had knitted himself, which she did not know he could do, and which were slightly uneven in a way that made them more valuable than anything even in quality could have been. She put them on immediately and wore them for the rest of the day, and Rabbit looked like a person who had accomplished something real. Ernesto sang at the table after supper, the song she had been half learning for 4 months, and this time she knew enough of the words to join him on the chorus. and the sound of it filled the dining room of the Cross Ranch and went out the windows into the cold December night and dissolved into the enormous Montana dark. Margaret stayed until the evening, sitting beside Clara at the table and talking about the school and the students and the 2 afternoons a week that were already marked on Clara's calendar, and when she left she embraced Clara in the direct, warm way she did everything and said, "You found exactly the right place." And Clara said, "I know. I know I did." It was Harlan who said the last word, because Harlan always said the last word, and the last word was always worth hearing. He found her alone in the kitchen after the last of the guests had gone, and the men had drifted to the bunkhouse, and the house had settled into the particular quiet of an evening that has held a great deal and is now resting. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands, the only time she had ever seen him hold his hat rather than wear it, and he said, "I want you to know something." "Tell me," she said. "When Cross brought you home from that platform, I'd been worried about him." He turned the hat in his hands. 6 years since Reeves. 6 years of watching him run this place alone, and he was good at it, but he paused, searching for the word. He was going further in, every year a little further in. Like a man walking out onto ice and not noticing it getting thinner. He looked at her. "And then he brought you home, and you made biscuits, and you told him you'd make a stew that would make him forget the last 3 years of his life." His mustache moved. "And I thought, well, maybe," Clara said. "Maybe was right," Harlan said. He put his hat back on. "You're good for him, Mrs. Cross." Mrs. Cross. She had spent 8 months corresponding with a man who had called her Dear Clara, and meant nothing by it. She had crossed the country and been abandoned on a platform, and taken in by a stranger, and spent 4 months building something she had never been given and had never known how to ask for. And now she was Mrs. Cross, in a kitchen she had organized, and a house she had filled, and a life she had built with her own hands, and it belonged to her completely, and she had earned every inch of it. "Good night, Harlan," she said. "Good night, Mrs. Cross." He touched his hat and left. She heard him cross the yard, heard the bunkhouse door, heard the ranch settle into silence around her, the deep, complete silence of a place that was exactly what it was, and had nothing to prove to anyone. She turned off the kitchen lamp and went upstairs. Nathaniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his good shirt, looking at the floor with the thoughtful, inward expression he had when he was taking stock of something. He looked up when she came in. "Harlan said something," Clara said. "Didn't he?" "He said 3 things. Nathaniel looked at his hands. "He said it was about time. He said she's good for you, Cross. Don't be an idiot about it." And he said he stopped, almost smiled. He said that in 40 years of working ranches he had never once been brought biscuits that good, and I would be a fool of the first order to let a woman who could cook like that go back to Cincinnati. Clara looked at him. He said that on the first day. He did. You've known what Harlan thought since the first day. I have, and it took you 4 months. I'm a careful man, Nathaniel said. I checked things twice, sometimes 3 times. He looked at her with those direct, plain eyes. 3rd time through is when the important things show up. She had said that to Judge Harmon about the settlement clause. He had remembered it, filed it, brought it back at exactly the right moment. That was Nathaniel Cross in its entirety, careful and thorough and precise, wasting nothing, honoring the things he held. She was one of the things he held now. She was going to be good to him for the rest of her life. She sat beside him on the edge of the bed, and he put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they sat in the quiet of the Cross Ranch on the first night of their life together. With the Montana winter pressing against the windows and the stars, burning cold and far above, and the whole enormous future arranged out ahead of them, like open country unmarked, full of possibility, entirely theirs. She thought about the platform, the letter, the 3 paragraphs and the cheerful signature. The $11.40 and nowhere to go. She thought about what she had believed, standing on that platform in her wrinkled traveling dress with her 3 trunks, and her broken hope that she had come to the end of something. She had not come to the end of something. She had been delivered by the worst moment of her life to the beginning of everything that actually mattered. A woman who had been abandoned became a woman who chose to stay not because she had no other option, but because this was the place she had built, and the man she had chosen, and the life she had made with her own hands, and it was worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth every difficult mile that had brought her here. Clara Cross, housekeeper no more, instrument of no man's scheme, belonging fully and completely to herself, and choosing to share that self, freely closed her eyes in the dark of her own home. In the arms of a man who had seen her clearly from the first moment and valued everything he saw, and felt, for the first time in her life, the absolute stillness of a person who is found exactly where they are supposed to be. She had arrived with nothing. She had built everything. And no one, not Arthur Haley, not Thomas Reeves, not Helen Alderman, not the weight of a lifetime of being told she was less than she was, no one would ever take that from her again.